Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I call this meeting to order. Bienvenue à la réunion numéro 4.
Welcome to meeting number 15 of the Standing Committee on Science and Research.
The Board of Internal Economy requires that committees adhere to the following health protocols, which are in effect until June 23, 2022. All individuals wishing to enter the parliamentary precinct must be fully vaccinated against COVID-19. All those attending the meeting in person must wear a mask, except for members who are at their place during proceedings. Please contact our clerk of the committee for further information on preventive measures for health and safety. As the chair, I will enforce these measures. And always, colleagues, I thank you for your cooperation. And I'd just like to welcome all our witnesses. We are grateful to have you, your time and your expertise. La réunion d'aujourd'hui se déroule dans...
Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021.
A few rules to follow. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You may speak in the official language of your choice. At the bottom of your screen, for those who are online, you may choose to hear floor audio or English or French. The raise hand feature is on the main toolbar should you wish to speak. A
reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair.
When you are not speaking, your microphone should be muted, and the committee clerk and I will maintain a speaking list for all members. And just to let our committee members know, Mr. Kent Hartwick of OPG has been invited back and will appear next meeting. Tonight was our third meeting on small nuclear reactors, and we're pleased to welcome from the Canadians for Nuclear Energy, Dr. Christopher Kiefer, President, welcome. Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, Joseph McBrearty, President and Chief Executive Officer, and Louis Riccoboni, Vice President, Corporate Affairs. Welcome to you both. And from the Coalition for Responsible Energy Development in New Brunswick, we have Dr. Susan O'Donnell, who is an adjunct research professor. Welcome to all of you. Each group will have 5 minutes to speak. At the 4.5-minute mark, I will hold up this yellow card. It lets you know there's 30 seconds left to go of your testimony. And with that, we will hand it over to Dr. Kiefer. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. My name again is Chris Kiefer. I'm a Toronto-based emergency physician and the president of Canadians for Nuclear Energy. I'm going to be making 3 main points in my testimony today. First, that nuclear energy is the keystone technology of our clean energy transition. Second, that SMRs are worthy of exploration, but that our CANDU reactor technology should remain central to our decarbonization efforts. And third, that Canada possesses the vital preconditions to rapidly and successfully deploy nuclear energy thanks to our CANDU refurbishment program. So why is nuclear power fundamental to the success of our energy transition? Our remaining hydroelectric and geothermal opportunities are limited, and the real-world evidence is in. Wind and solar are unable to deliver on deep decarbonization or energy security. Germany offers us a cautionary tale. Because the sun often does not shine and the wind often does not blow, Germany, despite a 550 billion euro green energy transition, relied on coal as its #1 source of electricity in 2021. In addition to coal, it remains critically dependent on Russian natural gas, which is bankrolling Putin's war of aggression in Ukraine. Nuclear energy, in contrast, has a proven track record. Ontario, unlike Germany, was able to phase out coal entirely thanks to nuclear energy. This action still stands as North America's greatest greenhouse gas reduction and has delivered most of our national progress on emissions since 2005. The need to rapidly scale up our nuclear fleet should not be controversial. All 4 IPCC decarbonization pathways that limit global warming to 1.5 degrees require nuclear to increase by 100 to 500% by 2050. Is it possible for us to accomplish such a task? And if so, what is our quickest route to meeting the goals that the IPCC has set out for us? SMRs are a promising suite of technologies, and there is certainly a need for smaller reactors like the BWRX 300 and others to fit the grids of our less populous provinces and to decarbonize remote northern communities, mining, and industrial sites. There is also significant interest in SMRs coming from our NATO partners in Europe. Canada, as a first mover in the West, has the opportunity to domesticate a large part of this future SMR supply chain and support our European allies in their transition away from Russian fossil fuels. However, SMRs should be thought of as a complement, not a replacement for CANDU in the pursuit of net zero and energy security. So why does CANDU offer Canada such an important opportunity? In Canada, we brought 23 large CANDU reactors online in just 22 years. Nationally, it is our second largest and second cheapest source of electricity after hydro. So we know it can be done, and countries like South Korea and China continue to efficiently build new nuclear. However, recent construction experience in the West has not inspired confidence, with nuclear plants under construction in the USA and Europe blowing past their deadlines and budgets. What went wrong? In short, a perfect storm. These countries, after decades of no new nuclear construction, pursued novel, first-of-a-kind designs with atrophied nuclear supply chains and workforces. Furthermore, they often paid for it using expensive private capital because of a lack of commitment from their respective governments and utilities. So what makes Canada different? We have in the CANDU a standardized reactor design with a record of excellent operational performance, and we are running our CANDU fleet better than ever. In the words of former Natural Resources Minister Seamus O'Regan, CANDU is a gold standard reactor, and many believe that if it were on the drawing board today, CANDU would be considered an advanced nuclear design. Our CANDU refurbishment program is proceeding on budget and on time and is renewing most of our nuclear fleet for another 40 years of operation. We are building not only most of the reactor components, like steam generators and pressure tubes, but also the critical project management, manufacturing, and installation experience we need to build the new fleet of CANDU reactors that will decarbonize Canada. Finally, Canada can facilitate access to affordable capital by, for example, including nuclear in the Green Bond Framework. Private capital is eager to invest in nuclear, and nuclear is the ultimate economic stimulus, with a $1.40 return to the Canadian economy for every dollar invested due to our 96% made in Canada supply chain. Therefore, my recommendations are the following. We must extend our refurbishment program to include all of Canada's CANDU fleet, including Pickering. We must build new CANDU as urgently as possible, starting with the remaining licensed sites at Darlington and new sites in our larger provinces. We should continue to support the construction of the West's first new SMRs at Darlington and Chalk River. And finally, nuclear must be included in federal financing mechanisms like the Green Bond Framework. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kiefer. We appreciate your being here. And now we will hear from Canadian Nuclear Laboratories for 5 minutes, and I think that's President McBurty.
Good evening, Madam Chair and committee members, and thank you for the opportunity to appear before the House of Commons Standing Committee on Science and Research to discuss small modular reactors. My name is Joe McBurty, and I'm the President and CEO at Canadian Nuclear Laboratories. Joining me today is Mr. Lou Riccoboni, our Vice President of Corporate Affairs and Business Development. I wish to begin by acknowledging that CNL's operations across Canada occur on the unceded and unsurrendered traditional territories of numerous First Nations. At CNL, we recognize the unique history, spiritual beliefs, cultural practices, and languages of Indigenous peoples in Canada, and we appreciate the responsibility that they have as stewards for the environment. I also want to reaffirm CNL's commitment to being an active participant in Canada's journey towards healing and our journey towards reconciliation. My remarks today seek to inform the committee's study of small modular reactors, or SMRs, and in particular our role at CNL in supporting their deployment. CNL is Canada's national nuclear laboratory. As part of our clean energy program, we are working to help advance these technologies in order to accelerate the deployment of SMRs here in Canada. We are technology agnostic. Our role is to leverage our scientific capabilities to prove or disprove theories and to inform the regulatory process. In short, we are an incubator for the development of innovative clean energy solutions. Our Chalk River campus is the birthplace of the CANDU reactor technology, and we have a long history in reactor development and design that we are now applying to next-generation reactors, which include SMRs, advanced reactors, and even fusion energy. Advancing these technologies begins in the laboratory to bring these concepts to life, to analyze their viability, and to ensure that the safety cases are thoroughly studied and thoroughly understood. These are the principles of our small modular reactor siting program, which was launched in 2018. We have Canadian experts in thermohydraulics, fuel development, reactor physics, cybersecurity, and waste management. 4 companies are now participating in our siting process, and just last year, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission announced that the license application to construct an SMR in Chalk River for Global First Power would move to a formal review. In addition, we have launched what we call the Canadian Nuclear Research Initiative, a cost-sharing program to leverage our extensive resources to make them more accessible to SMR vendors, including Terrestrial Energy, Kairos Power, Moltex, and even General Fusion for fusion energy research. SMRs have tremendous potential for Canada. They are smaller in size than traditional reactors, can be constructed efficiently in a modular way, produce less waste, and are expected to be much safer, more efficient, and more cost-effective than current designs. They can be deployed both on-grid and off-grid in remote locations, but the benefits go beyond electricity. SMRs also produce heat, which could be used to support agriculture. Think greenhouses or ammonia production. Heat for buildings or hydrogen production to power vehicles or to store excess energy. The system could even be used for desalination, turning salt water on remote shores into fresh drinking water. Canada is well positioned to serve as an international leader in this technology. We are a Tier 1 nuclear nation with a strong independent regulator, a mature supply chain, and an established workforce. More importantly, Canada needs them. Here in Canada, with large regions that are sparsely populated with limited infrastructure, these reactors really do make sense, and the time to act is now. This is particularly true in the Arctic, where there is a growing concern about the need to exert Canada's sovereignty. Other nations are eyeing the Arctic for its vast natural resources and shorter trade routes. Ensuring that Canada maintains an effective presence to protect our beautiful country will be critical in the future. To support that presence, we must be able to supply reliable, independent, clean, autonomous, and long-lasting energy. And SMRs are really the only technology that checks all of those boxes. CNL just completed a feasibility study which showed that an SMR could provide clean, economical, and reliable energy to our next-door neighbor, Garrison Petawawa, helping to reduce that base's reliance on fossil fuels and to enable its own energy security. It is my hope that your study will reach the same conclusions that other nations have come to, that next-generation nuclear energy has a lot to offer, environmentally, economically, socially, and also from a national security perspective. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before the committee.
Thank you so very much, Mr. McGritty. And now we will go to Dr. O'Donnell for 5 minutes, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I come to you from the territory of the Wolastoqey, the people of the beautiful and bountiful river. Thank you for inviting me. I represent the Coalition for Responsible Energy Development in New Brunswick. I sit on the Coalition for the Raven Project at the University of New Brunswick, where I'm an adjunct professor and social science researcher with expertise in technology adoption. Because I'm speaking about science and research, I'll mention that I'm a retired senior research officer from the National Research Council of Canada, where I was vice chair of the NRC Research Ethics Board. The climate crisis needs technologies to help us radically cut emissions by 2030. SMRs are in the design phase and can't do that. Given that you are the Science and Research Committee, I hope your report about how SMRs can contribute in future will be based on science and peer-reviewed research and reports by experts without a conflict of interest or profit motive. You heard last week that nuclear proponents want to construct micro SMR units and modules in a factory and roll them out to remote communities that are currently using diesel to generate electricity. But peer-reviewed research shows that building a factory to manufacture micro SMRs cannot be justified. Why? Because the total energy needed to replace diesel in all the remote communities in Canada is so small that a factory would never pay for itself. Peer-reviewed research shows that the types of nuclear reactors planned for New Brunswick have never been successfully commercialized. Why not? Because of technical problems unresolved after decades of trying. If SMRs are not commercialized, there will be no economic development. In the past 2 years, the government has given almost $100 million to 3 private nuclear companies for research to develop their SMR designs. Experts not funded by the nuclear industry have identified many potential problems with SMRs. The Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission has a pre-licensed vendor design review for SMRs, a VDR, but it's optional, not required. The CNSC is process fair, transparent, and based on independent scientific review. In 2021, the government gave more than $50 million to the Moltex company for SMR research to develop a technology to extract plutonium from spent CANDU fuel stored on the Bay of Fundy. The National Research Council of Canada conducted the technical review for the Moltex project. Despite the NRC and the serious concerns raised about the Moltex research, the government approved the project. It is necessary to ask, did the government act in accordance with the recommendations of the NRC scientific review? Your committee needs to insist that the NRC report be made available to you for your deliberations. Read the NRC report and ask yourselves, why was the Moltex project approved? I worked at the National Research Council during the War on Science when the government ignored or contradicted expert opinions by government scientists for political reasons. I have to ask, is another war on science happening now? Why would the government not consider expert advice from its own scientists before approving an SMR research project worth more than $50 million? Your committee can recommend that all funding for SMR research and development should require a transparent, independent, scientific review. I urge you to make this recommendation. Perhaps the whole funding envelope for net zero technology research could be moved to the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada. Why? Because then the public would be confident that SMR research and development will compete with other net zero technologies in a fair competition to ensure that public funds are spent supporting scientific excellence. If we're serious about climate action, we will need new technologies supported by science. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. O'Donnell. And again, I'd like to thank all our witnesses. We are grateful for your time and your expertise. We're now going to go to our members, and we have a really good committee here who are interested in what you have to say. And we're going to start with our 6-minute round. And tonight we begin with Mr. Williams. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I will start with Dr. Kiefer tonight. And Dr. Kiefer, is there any realistic path to net zero emissions without nuclear power?
As I said in my opening remarks, Canada is blessed with hydroelectric resources. In 4 of our main provinces, we get more than 90% of our energy from hydro. And so those provinces have clean grids, and that brings Canada's average emissions when it comes to electricity to a pretty competitive level. Not to deep decarbonization level, but pretty good level. We have outlying provinces that aren't as blessed with hydro resources. That would be our prairie provinces like Alberta and Saskatchewan and Ontario. You wouldn't think so because we have Niagara Falls, but we're a large economy. We have a huge demand. Ontario managed to achieve what is the gold standard of deep decarbonization, a grid with less than 50 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. And it did that with nuclear energy. Right now, this room, 61% of our power is coming from nuclear. We have other options, of course, and as I mentioned in my opening remarks, wind, solar, batteries, there's a lot of modeling studies claiming that we'll be able to deliver a reliable decarbonized grid with these technologies. I have to say, if Germany, one of the richest, wealthiest, a real industrial hub, is nowhere close to leveraging these technologies after almost half a trillion euros spent, Canada really needs to take pause. And we need to assess in a technologically neutral manner what is working and what has worked for Canada. We simply don't have enough rivers to dam. We need to double our electric grid, apparently, in order to achieve our net zero goals. And that's going to require the addition of something like 113 Site C dams, or the equivalent of 96 large Canada reactors. We need to get building quickly. We need to do what works, what we have a proven track record of. And nuclear is that technology. There are other options and other things that will complement that, but we're moving from a hydro towards a nuclear phase if we are serious about achieving net zero.
Thank you. And with electrical generation under provincial jurisdiction meeting that demand, what role does the federal government need to play, in your opinion?
Well, the federal government has been involved in issues of energy generation. Famously, the TMX pipeline was bought by this federal government. There's a share in the Hibernia oil field, and our hydroelectric projects at Muskrat Falls and Site C have been bailed out by the federal government. So there certainly is a role for the federal government to get involved. I was very involved in advocacy around including nuclear within the Green Bond framework, and I'm glad to see that the government included nuclear within the mandate of the Canadian Infrastructure Bank. When we're dealing with a situation that is urgent, that is emergent, as the climate situation is, the government needs to get creative. And so there are certainly roles, I think, to partner with the provinces to find vehicles, to financial mechanisms to support the spread of nuclear energy in this country. It was done at Point Lepreau, for instance. The federal government came up with some of the funding, and each province actually at that time period was offered a percentage of the funding for the first Canada reactor that they built. And so I think those mechanisms have existed, and we can put them into play in the future.
Thank you. You talked about nuclear being the second cheapest and the second largest through you, Madam Chair. What makes nuclear cheaper than any other greener energies besides hydro?
Well, nuclear energy represents a large upfront cost in terms of the capital costs of getting it built, but it delivers. Our Canada reactors now have been running for 40 years. They're at the time of their midlife when we refurbish them, and we can give them another 40 years of operation. So that capital expense is averaged out over many, many years, and the evidence speaks for itself. Right here in Ontario, hydro is about 7 or 8 cents per kilowatt hour. Nuclear is about 9 cents. Gas, about 14 or 15. Solar is 50 cents per kilowatt hour right here in Ontario. So the facts speak for themselves. It is an upfront capital investment. It's like building a bridge. It's like building an airport. These things take some resources to get going, but nuclear pays itself back over many, many years.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. And I was reading your testimony before the Natural Resources Committee in April, and you touched a great deal on how we deal long-term with nuclear waste. This has been an issue raised by this committee, and I was wondering if you could elaborate for our committee about what is different about Canada's nuclear waste compared to other nations and the safety of long-term storage of our nuclear waste.
I found this in the ice bin out there, and I brought it to sit with me because this is the amount of nuclear waste that you would produce if your entire life as a member of an OECD country was produced by nuclear energy. We produce very, very little waste, and all of the waste that Canada has produced in the last 60 years could be stored in one hockey rink piled 32 feet high, or the height of one telephone pole. So it's incredibly energy dense and therefore produces very little waste. And we have a good permanent solution for that, which is the Deep Geologic Repository. There's one being built in Finland right now, and that can store waste on geologic timeframes. The challenge that anti-nuclear people have when it comes to nuclear waste is demonstrating a mechanism for it to get out and harm people. And the geology that we are looking at contains water. Water can only move 1 meter per million years through that rock. And that's the mechanism by which any of this waste could ever get out. So we have excellent geology here. We have a proven way to deal with nuclear waste on a long-term basis. So those were some of my comments at the NRC committee last month.
Thank you. And I'll have you submit this last question in writing. I'm going to run out of time. Are there any credible concerns for the potential proliferation of the uranium which will be used in Canadian SMR and MMR reactors? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Williams, and thank you for giving that last question in writing. We will, of course, follow up for you. We will now go to Ms. Diab for 6 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to all our witnesses for coming to our Science and Research Committee. I'm going to direct my first questions to Canadian Nuclear Laboratories. I was quite interested in your opening remarks where you quite frankly said that research, it all begins in the laboratory. You have to study it, research it. And of course, this is part of what we are doing in our committee here. And we want to hear from researchers and scientists and so on. I guess the questions that I'd have for you is, to what extent are Canadian universities or educational institutions involved in SMR development projects currently in Canada? And what role do you see them playing in these projects?
So thanks very much for that question. I'm not sure I can authoritatively speak for all of the academic organizations involved, but many are. I believe McMaster University, probably McGill University, are involved in these studies. We, as a national nuclear laboratory, we kind of bridge the gap between academic and the actual industry. So we are able to take academic ideas, research, and actually put it to the test in our laboratories to be able to actually prove that systems work or prove that they do not work. And so that I think the entire synergy or synergistic part of the academic world and universities with national laboratories and the industry and their own industry research all play a very valuable part in providing the necessary research and information to make decisions about this technology.
So do you see a role for the federal government to play here in to make it easier for you to bridge the gap between academic and industry? And are we doing that?
So I certainly think there is a role for the federal government. I think, increased funding, increased attention to where these gaps exist from the research, from test bed research to demonstration reactors to get out to actual industrial production. One of the things that this industry is very accustomed to, very similar to the airline industry, is doing prototypes or demonstrations. You want to be able to actually take the theory that you have and put it to practice. Test it, as you could say, kick the tires on these things, see how they work. We've shown this in multiple reactor technologies throughout the world. And much of the reactor technology that's been talked about for SMRs actually has been demonstrated throughout the world, whether it's pressurized water reactors, boiling water reactors, or high-temperature gas reactors. This information exists, but you also want to be able to have a test bed that you can ensure that your technology works. So thank you.
No, thanks for that. I just want to move to another topic, one that I'm actually very familiar with in my provincial roles. But we have a lot of labor challenges in the country on many fronts. But here we're talking about SMR developments in Canada. What are the labor challenges as regards to that? And I mean, Dr. Kiefer, if that's something that you can comment on, I'd be interested to hear about that. We had previous witnesses that have come on and said there are, and I think there was a witness that said no, we have enough. So I just want to get your opinion on that, because for this to move on, we certainly need to have enough researchers and scientists and people that are qualified and capable to carry on with this. So what can you tell us on that front? What are the capabilities currently that we have within our labor force?
I can speak more to the labor side, and I would defer questions about scientists and academics to my colleagues at the CNL. But Canada is uniquely well positioned in the West. We have a vibrant supply chain which is activated. We are building critical CANDU components as we speak right now and installing them, gaining the project managed experience, et cetera. There's 76,000 men and women working in the sector right here in Canada. So we have a huge advantage when it comes to labor. And again, an investment in nuclear benefits our labor force hugely because these are well-paying union jobs. The nuclear sector has the highest union density of any sector across the country. So I'm going to defer the rest of your question over to my co-presenter here regarding scientific and academic expertise.
Thanks, Dr. Kiefer.
Absolutely. Anyone can take that. Yes.
I'll start. So I think it is probably pretty obvious that with the amount of research that's going on, the amount of plants that we believe need to be designed and built, you need a lot of people. That is not that I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. When we look at the amount of energy technology that has to be developed and executed over the next 10, 15, 20 years, I think it's paramount that the government and industry invests in the education for the young people coming up. This is many of the folks in the nuclear industry are starting to reach their retirement age, and having a youthful approach and a new blood, so to speak, into the.
Mr. McReady, I am sorry to do this. It's the worst part of this. Please forgive me.
Thank you very much. We're always constrained with time. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Ms. Diab. And now we will go to Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca for 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Permettez-moi de saluer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to wish our witnesses welcome and say hello, greet my colleagues. I'd like to talk more about the Moltex program, the federal government program. The federal government provided $50 million, as you said, Dr. O'Donnell, and the Deputy Minister, Associate Deputy Minister, Ms. Johnson, said that this was there was a potential for recycling the CANDU nuclear reactor waste, and it would reduce radioactive waste that has a long life. What scientific studies are there to support that? Did the federal government really do its scientific research and did it have it peer reviewed before providing the $50 million? Thank you very much for your question. I listened in French, but will answer in English.
These studies that were done, and in fact, it's quite interesting, the Moltex project, because they're offering a new kind of reprocessing technology. I heard last week some of your witnesses say that this reprocessing has been done in other countries for years. The reason this is innovative is it's a new type of technology called pyroprocessing. It's only been done one place in the world, in the Idaho National Labs in the US, and it's been a technological and financial fiasco. They've been trying for more than 10 years to reduce the amount of waste, and it hasn't worked out at all. What they have done is make a big mess, and they've made a lot of additional waste products that they now have to deal with. Very, very complex. The problem is that less than 1% of the fissile materials that's left in the CANDU fuel bundles once they're outside of the reactor can actually be so-called recycled. But there's no evidence to show that you can cleanly remove the plutonium from the fuel. And so what you're left with is a lot of materials that will still need to be dealt with for millions of years. Plus, you'll have a lot of new liquid waste. And that's what we're mostly concerned about in New Brunswick, is that we're going to have to pick up the costs as taxpayers of the new liquid waste, storing the waste. They don't even know what kind of materials can contain these wastes. There have no studies been done on this project. And we don't want to be left to clean up the big mess. That's the big problem. I could talk about the non-proliferation aspects if you like later.
Merci, Dr. O'Donnell.
Thank you very much, Dr. O'Donnell. And let's go move on to the non-proliferation aspect. You know, Canada signed the treaty on non-proliferation regarding everything dealing with nuclear. It's the same thing with the government. I mean, on the American side, it's an elite group of people and previous advisors to the White House that expressed to Canada and had sent letters to Mr. Garneau and to the at the time, and the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister also, stating that by supporting the extraction of plutonium from used fissile materials, well, that would go against the non-proliferation agreement. Could you tell us more about these warnings from the Americans?
What the government keeps saying about that is that we're not risking nuclear arms in Canada or non-proliferation in Canada. That's not the issue. It's the signal, and it makes it very clear in the letter from the U.S. non-proliferation experts. It's the signal that it's giving to other countries. In particular, South Korea has been trying to do the same type of technology, pyroprocessing, for more than 10 years, and the United States has not given it permission because of the very volatile nuclear situation on the Korean Peninsula. And just last week, I was looking at a video from the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency. They're very concerned about a new nuclear test from North Korea. So the Korean Peninsula is extremely volatile. And what they're concerned about in the US is if Canada starts doing this technology called pyroprocessing, it basically gives the green light to South Korea to do the same thing, and it risks destabilizing a very fragile situation right now with nuclear weapons around the world. And you know that this is in the news every day. It's a very fragile situation right now around the world, and so they're concerned about why is Canada giving it this signal that this type of technology is okay, given that there was an informal ban on it for many years in Canada.
J'aimerais vous entendre également.
I'd like to hear what you have to say also about the CEO of Moltex stated, clearly he stated that obviously he wants to sell these reactors to the entire planet. Is there not a possibility there that the plutonium technology funded by public funds in Canada would increase the risk of nuclear proliferation elsewhere?
Some experts have said if we start exporting that, we're basically exporting bomb-making capabilities. And of course, there are international safeguards, there's policy, there's all kinds of guidelines for it. But again, I would ask you to really consider if Canada wants to be exporting this kind of technology. We already know what happened in the 70s in India when Canada gave a peaceful reactor to India, and they actually used reprocessing technology and they exploded the first bomb. And that's when the US actually banned reprocessing, and
Dr.
they did the same in Canada.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. I'm sure if members want to follow up, they will. I apologize for interrupting. And merci, Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca. We'll now go. We welcome Ms. Cirillo to our committee tonight for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. And I'll start my questioning with Madame O'Donnell, and then I have a question for Mr. Kiefer. So, Madame O'Donnell, you mentioned about the science right now and the funding of science. And I just wonder if you could elaborate a bit on if there is fair and open processes right now in Canada for energy innovators and for scientists to get research and prototype funding.
Well, that's actually was the focus of my presentation. Thank you for the question through the chair. We have a tri-council in Canada that funds research, and the one that would fund the appropriate research we're talking about tonight is the NSERC. And the funding, when it goes through NSERC, it's funded by independent scientific review, and the public has a lot of confidence in that. Unfortunately, the way that the projects have been funded so far do not go through the same level of scientific review. So we've no guarantee that the projects have been vetted scientifically. But there is a process, and that's why I would strongly recommend to your committee that we consider moving the funding for all net zero technologies to NSERC.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Kiefer, you mentioned about possibility for refurbishment. And one of my colleagues here around the table also mentioned the labor shortages. So the two are kind of together. I had a visit recently from the Boilermakers, and they're very concerned about the lack of high-pressure welders and the access to high-pressure welders. And I'm just wondering if you have any comments around these expertise in high-pressure welders that we don't have enough of in Canada right now for the current nuclear reactors. Speaking of which, I used to live in Pickering, so that was interesting to me. But yeah, if you've got any thoughts about those high-pressure welders and the lack of that skill set in Canada right now for refurbishment.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to confess that question is a little too specific for my area of expertise. I'm well acquainted with the Boilermakers, and they are very involved in our Canada refurbishments. But just briefly on the topic of refurbishment, we are again getting another 40 years of the lowest carbon source of power that we have on our electricity grid. And it's very interesting because we are refurbishing Darlington and Bruce, but not Pickering. And one of my recommendations is that we continue our refurbishment to include Pickering. The loss of that plant, which is the same age as the Bruce A one, which is being refurbished, is going to eliminate all of Canada's national emissions reductions progress to date. We're going to be adding the equivalent of 8 million transatlantic flights every year because we're replacing that clean nuclear energy with natural gas. So it's my group's strong recommendation that we reconsider that. And absolutely, I think the Boilermakers deserve to be listened to, and we need to be supporting apprenticeships in these essential skilled trades. The refurbishments are moving along on budget and on time. And I think that they can continue to do so. Once we finish at Darling, we can shift those workers over to Pickering and seal in Canada's nuclear advantage.
Just a question, Mr. Kiefer. How many members are there in the Canadians for Nuclear Energy? How many members in your group?
Last count was 44.
There's 44 members. And so you haven't heard this about the lack of high-pressure welders to be able to do refurbishments? You haven't heard that before?
No, I haven't.
Okay, great. Okay, do I have a little few minutes?
2 minutes.
Okay, so Mr. McReardie, I had a quick question. You mentioned, and I quote, expected to be much safer. Could you elaborate on that a little bit of why the disclaimer expected?
So thanks very much for that question. So most of the new technology involves much more passive safety features. So today's reactors require some sort of active safety measures in their design. The newer reactors are really designed to be able to walk away from it and not have to worry about decay heat, not to have to worry about fuel damage. So that's really kind of the much safer. They're designed to be more straightforward to operate, and that's kind of the crux of the safety. The fuel is designed to be much more accident resistant. The passive designs are designed to provide cooling through any type of accident. So when you look from a safety perspective, that's the basis of more safer, I guess. Yes.
Okay, and then I'm going to ask you one more question just around Indigenous communities. When you started your speaking today, you acknowledged Indigenous communities, and we know, especially north, that Indigenous communities would like to have energy autonomy, and they'd like to manage it themselves. Do you believe that these SMRs can be managed in communities where there's smaller populations?
So first off, that's a very good question. And the first thing that you have to really understand, I think, is the industry needs to listen to the folks who are in those communities. As we go out and try to spread the message of why nuclear is valuable, of getting folks' opinions and listening to their concerns is really kind of the first step of that process.
Seconds. You're okay. Thank you, Ms. Cirillo. And again, we're glad you're able to join us tonight. We're now going to go to the 5-minute round, and this time we begin with Mr. Tucker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll start with the Canadian Nuclear Laboratories. Do you know who the largest private sector company that has the largest amount of Indigenous employment is in Canada?
I believe it's Camco in Saskatchewan, which is a uranium mining and processing organization.
Absolutely, and I'm very proud of them, located in northern Saskatchewan, that has a stellar environmental record and record on economic reconciliation that cannot be matched. Very proud of that company's involvement. And we talk about the jobs that come from nuclear. I was lucky enough to meet with some of the union representatives from the nuclear industry in Ontario, and their message, and I'd like your comment on it, is that we would ramp up, and it's a good thing to have shortages, as in more staffing and more employment, more families that could get paychecks from nuclear. Would that be a fair assessment?
I think that's a very fair assessment. As we touched on a little bit earlier in the conversation, this is going to be a growing industry. You are going to need not only the scientists, the engineers, but you also need skilled trades to actually execute these construction projects, and you're going to need skilled operators to actually operate these plants.
We're really hopeful with EV technology that is coming on board that will lower our emissions, but what's the point of electric vehicle if it's going to be powered by natural gas or other energy sources? So nuclear seems like a no-brainer. We've heard before that we will never meet our doubling of the electricity needs on EV on the existing technology. Is there anything that would be anywhere close to nuclear?
I think this is probably an opportunity to see and to discuss how nuclear ties into hydrogen fuels going into the future. So the ability today, basically hydrogen is produced mainly through electrolysis or catalysis. It requires a fairly significant amount of energy, basically fossil fuel energy to be able to make that happen. The beauty of a small modular reactor or even a larger reactor is that you can use that process heat. Remember, a reactor produces heat to actually produce steam to turn the turbine to make electricity. With that process heat, you have the ability to produce hydrogen, not only to produce electricity, but to produce hydrogen so that you can actually fuel other vehicles.
And now switching gears to Dr. Kiefler. In the last 10 years, any lives lost to the storage of nuclear waste in Canada?
So this has been researched not just in Canada but around the world, and we've not been able to ascertain a single death from stored civilian nuclear waste.
It's a misconception. It's not reality that I've been told. And your example about your pop can about the energy that it would be the after use would hold in a pop can. How much energy would be still stored in there that we hope that, be it the Mortex design that might solve some of that, or future technology that could recycle that waste? And that's the ultimate great thing about nuclear, is that you might get more energy out of that pop can. So what percent of energy is actually removed from that pop can through the energy, the first pass?
Around 5%. So there's a significant amount more energy in what we call the spent nuclear fuel. And there are promising technologies that we will be able to access that other 95%. And that was a big part of our plans early on, even the evolution of nuclear energy. Obviously, we've discovered there's a lot more uranium in the world, and it's more economical to use that at this time. But certainly, these are promising technologies that we should look into as a Tier 1 nuclear nation.
Absolutely. And Chair, how much time do I have left?
1 minute and
great.
5 seconds.
We're going to go back to the Canadian Nuclear Laboratories. And we're talking about nuclear and the benefits of such. Do you, in Ontario, just yes or no, you would agree that it is a good thing that we got rid of the coal-fired generation?
Absolutely.
Correct? Now, switching gears to Dr. O'Donnell, is it a good thing that we got rid of the coal use in Ontario?
Certainly, and we're hoping to do the same in New Brunswick. We have a coal-fired plant here. Mm-hmm.
And that was done through nuclear, and that there's no other research, there's no other energy source in it. Maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. O'Donnell, that any existing energy generation in Ontario that could have backfilled that coal, correct?
Well, I can say that I've just recently read a study showing that in 10 years we could actually, with better transmission lines from Quebec, and with the price of storage dropping and wind and solar.
I hate to do this, Dr. O'Donnell. Perhaps, Mr. Tucker,
I'll
would you
send it
like
in.
a written answer?
I'll send it in written. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you both, and I'm sorry to interrupt. With that, we're going to go for 5 minutes to Mr. McKinnon, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to thank all the witnesses for joining us today. And there's so many questions, so little time. So I'm going to have to focus on P&L. While I'm dying to ask about things like micro reactors and very small and so on, and the importance of reactors in the north. I think what I'd like to focus on, firstly at least, is waste. So over your tenure at Chalk River, you've 50, 60 years or so, you've accumulated a small amount of waste that you have in in-ground storage. I wonder if you could tell us what is the state of the art, if you could, in terms of repurposing that waste, and what sorts of new nuclear process need we to develop for new reactors to make use of it better, or what can we do to harvest that energy?
So, certainly, from a standpoint of being able to harvest, the capability and energy inside spent fuel is reprocessing. Reprocessing is certainly is an option. Other countries do use it. We have the capabilities at CNL to provide the technological R&D to companies like Moltex to be able to figure out how do you actually do that, and how do you make sure that the systems that you're putting in place are safe. But from the standpoint of making sure that getting energy out of the waste, as Dr. Kiefer said, there's an awful lot of fuel that remains, and that fuel could be, if policies lined up and technologies were approved, could be used for future energy production.
So, what kind of research focus do we need to be able to advance that challenge?
So I think From the spent fuel research into actual used fuel or usable fuel, you have to understand the processes. You have to understand what the risks are with that fuel from a standpoint of proliferation, but also you need to also be able to understand what the fuel and material components are and how they're going to interact. You want to make sure that you understand the safety cases that those fuels provide to you, and at the end of the day, you also have to understand what waste management processes and procedures you have to put into place to actually provide a final repository for the spent fuel, I guess.
So, what does reprocessing this fuel look like? Is it a matter of extracting U-238 out of the mix, or is it about extracting other fissile products from results of different sub processes, and are there nuclear reactors that can be designed to use those other byproducts efficient?
So the processes are chemical and physical processes that you can use to actually extract the material. As we know, those processes are used overseas in other countries. And I would be a little remiss to go too much more into detail on how that process works, because I would just say I am not an expert in the fuel reprocessing area.
About a minute left, so let's talk about fusion. It's pretty exciting. I know it's nowhere in the world a commercially viable thing. How can you give us some guidance on where that's going and what time we'll get there?
So there are many projects underway throughout the world. I think there's ones that are the General Fusion, for instance, out of British Columbia, is working on a project. The ITER project in the south of France, which is a large international project, which is supposed to, I think, get to first plasma here within the next few years. But the ITER project is still a demonstration project. I would hesitate to say an exact date when you would see energy come out of fusion, more energy come out than you put in, but it's probably 20, 30 years would be just a take for me. Thanks.
Thank you. I have 20 seconds left. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. McKinnon. Appreciate that. And with that, we will go to Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca for 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'll go back to Dr. O'Donnell. Dr. O'Donnell, are there other elements that we just can't get around that we should be considering regarding the Multex technology currently being developed?
Yes, well, I think it's important to go back to the letter from U.S. experts and what they have asked for, and I think what we really need is an international committee to actually examine the non-proliferation aspects of the Multex technology that they intend to export. We do know that it has raised a lot of concerns internationally, and so that's where the focus should be. Canada should not be in a place where we're actually blindly subsidizing and be seen to subsidize technology that could destabilize the non-proliferation situation right now. The other thing I will have to say that the experts asked for and that we're really concerned about is if Multex doesn't get the billions of dollars that will take to complete its project, we could be left with a huge environmental mess on the shores of the Bay of Fundy. That's a huge concern with all the new wastes that are being developed, that if the project starts and doesn't complete, we will have this mess on our hands. Thank you.
Merci, Dr. O'Donnell.
Thank you, Dr. O'Donnell. Could you tell us also about the situation with Japan? The American experts, in particular in that letter, stated that Japan was the only country that reprocesses nuclear waste, even though it doesn't have any nuclear reactors.
To answer that question in writing, thank you. And I will give you a complete answer that way. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you.
Yes.
Combien de temps, Madame la Présidente?
How much time do I have left, Madam Chair?
1 minute, 50 seconds.
Excellent.
Excellent. Dr. O'Donnell, according to you, you formerly worked at the NRC. What should the government do instead of investing in SMRs? Is there other technology?
Canada has this huge net zero technology fund, and we want innovation. But my point is that we have to be measuring SMRs against the other technologies that are out there. We can't just be giving $50 million to one technology without a proper scientific review. They have to be competing with each other and judged accordingly to find out which are the best technologies moving forward. It might be nuclear, it might be something else. There's lots of ideas out there, and why are we focusing all of the money without proper scientific review on SMRs?
Dr. O'Donnell, thank you. Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca, merci. And with the last 2.5 minutes, we'll go to Ms. Zarillo, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm actually going to ask questions to Mr. McBrady again. I just wanted to hear a little bit about Chalk River. If I understand correctly, your organization runs Chalk River. Just if you could give some insights around the labor issues, and even I'm interested in the high-pressure welders, but I'm also interested in ongoing consultation that your organization might have with community partners like First Nations, NGOs in the community, regional districts, municipalities. I'd just like to hear a little bit about how your business runs and what's working and how you stay connected to the community.
Thanks. Thanks very much. So to address the first part of the question, we have a very active recruiting program to be able to make sure that we can get a broad spectrum of engineers, trades, skilled scientists throughout when we link ourselves with universities to be able to try to draw from those organizations to be able to supply our research needs. Our research needs are not only in the nuclear world, but we span in cybersecurity and biology as well. With respect to community outreach and relations with communities, we have a very extensive outreach program, not only public outreach program, but also Indigenous outreach program as well. We actually have just gone through the part 2 of our hearing for our near-surface disposal facility, which was conducted in Pembroke last week. And, we were, together with the CNSC, we provided evidence of, hundreds of interactions and connections, not only with the public, but most importantly, I would say, with Indigenous communities. And the relations with Indigenous communities is incredibly important to continue to grow. This is a growing thing that I think everyone's starting to learn how to do. And it's important for us to be able to understand the needs of the communities and to be able to answer their needs. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Kiefer, you mentioned that there was 44 members in your organization, and I'm just wondering if there are First Nation communities that are members of your organization, NGOs, are there any municipalities? If you could just give us an idea of what your membership looks like.
Sure. No, membership is individual citizens. We have members from coast to coast to coast, Victoria, BC, to Nunavut, and right out to the Rock and Newfoundland. But it is all private individuals. This is not a coalition organization.
Dr. Kiefer, thank you. Ms. Cirillo, thank you. It is now my job to thank Dr. Kiefer, Mr. McBrearty, Mr. Riccoboni, and Dr. O'Donnell. We appreciate your time, your expertise, and your being so gracious to join us all tonight. We thank you, and to our colleagues, we will suspend briefly before our next panel. Suspend. back. We are on the third night of this study regarding small nuclear reactors. We have appearing as an individual, Evelyn Gigante. Have I pronounced that correctly?
I say gigantus.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Gigantis. From the Canadian Coalition for Nuclear Responsibility, we have Dr. Gordon Edwards, the president. And from Westinghouse Electric Canada, we have Mr. Saab, the president. And I will just let everyone know each organization will have 5 minutes. At the 4.5-minute mark, I will hold up a yellow card that lets you know there's 30 seconds left to go. You have a committee who is interested in what you have to say. We'd like to welcome you. We're grateful for your being here, and we look forward to hearing from you. So with that, we're going to begin with Ms. Gigantis, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am not a supporter of the development of SMRs either in Canada or anywhere else. The reason is that our weather over the last few years is giving us clear evidence that climate change is rapidly becoming a challenge to all life on this wonderful planet. SMRs are being touted by the nuclear industry as a necessary part of slowing and containing climate change. I believe the complete opposite. I think the nuclear industry is trying to save itself from a downward spiral and is waging a desperate campaign to convince the public and elected representatives to invest massive public funds in an ill-placed effort to battle climate change through SMR development. The fact is that here and abroad, the best informed scientists and economists are stating the obvious. The surest, least costly, and quickest way to reduce the carbon emissions which threaten life on our Earth is to limit our energy use through conservation measures, to use electricity as our major source of energy, and to generate that electricity with renewable resources. In Canada, that means a combination of wind, solar, geothermal, and hydro. I have provided your committee with an article co-written by two experts, a Canadian and an American. It describes the way we can electrify our major energy usage while deftly shifting energy supply sources and meeting backup demand. I've also provided an article about the recent study by the David Suzuki Foundation, which comes to the same conclusion. That's the positive part of what I'd like your committee to be ready to report. There's also a negative part, which I hope you will consider and determine to report. Nuclear power is not an answer to any problem. Nuclear power has generated wastes which threaten life and health wherever it is in use or has been in use. Its history, both here and abroad, is linked to preparation for war, and that history repeats itself to this day as we watch, pained and frightened by the terrible threat to nuclear reactor sites in Ukraine. Here in Canada, we have scandalous nuclear wastes piled up in places like Chalk River and Elliott Lake. We are engaged in the pretense that there will soon be a new nuclear waste management policy which will deal with these kinds of awful, life-threatening messes. Meanwhile, the former chair of the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission ensured that most SMRs would not even require an environmental impact assessment under the Impact Assessment Act of 2019, because he managed to arrange matters to ensure that most SMRs are not included on the project list associated with the Act. It's an astonishing fact that most current Canadian SMR proposals will not be subject to any environmental review. I've also provided a third article on the subject of the extraordinary levels of nuclear waste that would be generated by developing SMRs. It outlines the fact that per unit of energy produced, SMRs would produce much larger amounts of high-level nuclear waste than the much larger CANDU reactors. To sum up, I believe SMRs are unnecessary, given that there are alternative methods of electrifying our energy sources that will be much cheaper, faster, more flexible, and environmentally acceptable. And the last thing this world needs is SMRs sold to countries where their existence would add to the dangers posed, excuse me, by terrorism and war. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gigantis. We appreciate your being here. We're now going to go to the Canadian Coalition for Nuclear Responsibility, to Dr. Edwards for 5 minutes. And before you start, could I ask anyone who's got a blurred background to take it off because it's affecting the quality of the transmission? And Dr. Edwards, the floor is yours for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My name is Gordon Edwards. I'm very grateful for this opportunity to make a brief presentation on SMRs. I'm a retired professor of science and mathematics. I'm also a co-founder and president of the Canadian Coalition for Nuclear Responsibility and have served as a consultant on nuclear issues for many years. The nuclear industry has been declining for the last quarter century. In 1997, nuclear power contributed 17% of global electricity supply. Today, that share has dropped to 10% and is still going down. In North America, no new large reactors were ordered after 1978 for the rest of the century. The CANDU industry is moribund. Exorbitant costs and lengthy construction delays, as well as questions about radioactive waste, reactor accidents, and the proliferation of nuclear weapons, have plagued the industry. The current push for a nuclear renaissance based on a fleet of hitherto untested small modular reactors, or SMRs, is not the first time the industry has promoted a new golden age of nuclear power. The first big push came after the 1973 oil embargo, when AECL predicted that hundreds of CANDU reactors would be built from coast to coast in Canada. That turned out to be a false alarm. Hydro-Quebec itself envisioned at that time up to 50 new large power reactors along the St. Lawrence River, but none of them were ever built. The only Quebec reactor that was under construction at the time is now shut down permanently. The second big push came when the 21st century began. There was much fanfare about a global nuclear renaissance, whereby thousands of large reactors would be built around the world. But that nuclear revival also turned out to be a bust. Only a handful of new reactors were ever ordered, including one in Finland, one in Flamanville, France, and 4 in the southern states of Georgia and South Carolina. Those projects all experienced years of delay and massive cost overruns. 2 nuclear corporate giants were bankrupted. Today, we're told of a new renaissance of nuclear power, involving a multiplicity of reactor designs called small modular reactors. Pardon my skepticism, is this another flash in the pan? Will this renaissance go anywhere like the previous ones? There are warning signs. First of all, there are no customers. It's a technology in search of a market. Second, there's insufficient funding. What little there is public funding, which, if it were withdrawn, would kill the SMR surge almost instantly. Third, the alternatives to SMRs are proving to be faster, cheaper, and much more attractive, much more in demand than nuclear. This committee can provide an important service to Canadians by recommending that science and research be brought to bear to examine the various contentious claims being made by SMR proponents in order to attract public support and public funding. First, radioactive waste. A recent report published by the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, co-authored by Alison McFarlane, the former chair of the U.S. NRC, has found that the radioactive legacy from SMRs will be significantly larger and more problematic per unit of energy produced than is the case with large power reactors. SMR advocates have disputed these claims, but I urge this committee to recommend an objective investigation of this dispute by independent scientists to help decision makers and the public know the truth. Second, weapons proliferation has already been brought up. 9 non-proliferation experts from the USA who have served under 6 different U.S. presidents, have urged Canada to undertake an independent review of the proliferation vulnerability associated with the proposed Moltex plant in New Brunswick, a small modular reactor that requires plutonium extracted from Canada's existing nuclear fuel. something that we absolutely do not need. There is no rationale for such a step. Nevertheless, plutonium extraction is a key step in proliferating nuclear weapons capabilities. I urge this committee to recommend an independent scientific and security review of the proliferation risks of plutonium extraction, which I underscore again is entirely unnecessary. Third, public accountability. I request this committee to ascertain and publish any detailed science-based rationale, if any exists, behind the decision to forego environmental assessments of almost all SMRs, hereby hampering public accountability. Fourth, negawatts rather than megawatts. Energy efficiency is cheaper, faster, and more certain than any energy supply option. To be specific, I urge the committee to recommend a scientifically based study of the comparative cost and effectiveness of deploying heat pumps in various buildings throughout Canada rather than building SMRs. SMRs are a poor response to the climate emergency, too slow, too costly, too dubious. In fact, it's kicking the can down the road and hoping for the best. Some call it hopium. SMRs will make no contribution to fighting climate change in the next 5 years. It'll make marginal contributions at best in the next decade. And I am not alone in believing that the claims made by SMR proponents cannot be substantiated. However, I'm willing to see those claims.
Dr. Edwards.
This committee can help do just that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Edwards. Thank you for your testimony. We appreciate it. We're now going to go to Westinghouse Electric Canada. President Saab, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to the Standing Committee of Science and Research for the opportunity to share my testimony of how small nuclear reactors can benefit our environment, the economy, and our fellow Canadians. As President of Westinghouse Electric Canada, I have the privilege of witnessing the positive impacts that our nuclear employees, services, and technology make every single day. In transparency, I've spent my entire 20-year career with the Canadian nuclear industry, largely focused on supporting Canada's top-performing CANDU nuclear power plants, which tonight is powering 6 of every 10 light bulbs in the House of Commons with carbon-free energy from Bruce Power and Ontario Power Generation. With respect to the environment, research conducted by Enviroeconomics and by Navius on behalf of the Canadian Nuclear Association concluded that between 2030 and 2050, SMRs could reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 216 megatons in the industrial heavy sector alone. This means that SMRs can contribute to Canada's net zero of 2050 objective by reducing emissions an average of 14 megatons per year. That's equivalent to taking over 3 million cars off the road each and every year. At Westinghouse, it is our engineering-based position that the carbon-free benefits of SMRs, including from our eVinci microreactor, will extend beyond power generation to bring social, economic, emission reduction benefits to Canadians across our provinces and territories. In reality, the positive impacts of commercial nuclear power continue to be realized today, for which Westinghouse has proudly been innovating with for the past 134 years. This past March, Westinghouse Canada was honored to receive a $27 million contribution agreement from the Strategic Innovation Fund's Net Zero Accelerator program. For our part, we will invest an additional $40 million into our Canadian eVinci R&D program. We will create an additional 60 highly skilled full-time jobs and sponsor over 250 co-op students. The contributions of just eVinci microreactor program will stimulate significant spend in Canada's domestic supply chain and contribute to the advancement of more than 300 highly skilled individuals. This is in addition to the 250 talented employees already working for Westinghouse Canada today. For context, only 4 years ago, Westinghouse had a single employee in Canada. I'm witness that nuclear is truly a GDP catalyst. Let me say something else. Federal support will continue to be critical if we are to put Canada at the forefront of this emerging technology. SMRs will provide clean electricity and heat to where it's needed the most, while enabling economic development and job creation. We as a country, you as elected officials, us as members of industry must work together to remove unnecessary hurdles that can risk holding up our potential solutions for Canadians, such as in remote communities starved for reliable energy, looking to end their dependence on transported diesel, and can use eVinci to power year-round greenhouses and desalinate drinking water. And mining sites want to reduce their carbon emissions with a reliable 24/7 power source that can partner with renewables such as wind and solar. For industrial users with high-temperature applications who consume large amounts of fossil fuel today and are seeking carbon-free, high-quality heat for bitumen extraction or even hydrogen production. for Indigenous communities looking to use more energy as fundamental to the economic and social betterment, but wanting rightly to have a role in project ownership and management. And at universities, where the versatility of an Da Vinci as a research reactor can inspire a new generation of students in pursuing further benefits from this clean energy source, including medical isotope production. SMRs are truly positioned to help Canada export this technology globally to new and existing marketplaces, building upon Canada's safe track record of exported nuclear technology to 6 other countries championed by AECL. Westinghouse selected Canada to accelerate our Da Vinci commercialization program because Canada has all the necessary elements to help us succeed. True market needs, a world-class nuclear regulator in the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, capable nuclear laboratories under the stewardship of Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, a mature supply chain, domestic uranium mining industry led by Cameco and Denison Mines, extensive nuclear operating experience from Bruce Power, OPG, MB Power, and a strong talent pool of existing and future employees. Finally, last but not least, Canada's strong international brand as well. Madam Chair, thank you for allowing me to share my perspective on the potential and the realized benefits of small nuclear reactors today. I'd be pleased to take questions from the Standing Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Saab. I'd like to thank all our witnesses. We appreciate your time and your expertise and your perspectives tonight. We're now going to go to our committee members, and you really have a very dedicated committee who's very interested. They're eager to ask you questions. We're going to begin with a 6-minute round, and tonight we begin with Ms. Gladue for 6 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses that we have. I want to start off by talking to Mr. Saab, and what I would start off with is I want to correct some of the misinformation and disinformation that's out there regarding the environmental reviews on SMR projects. We had testimony from multiple witnesses that indicated, yes, that they are under environmental review, and in fact that those reviews were extending the timeline of the approval of their projects. And so I wanted to put that on the record. I guess, first of all, there's been some allegations that, somehow nuclear power is very dangerous. Mr. Saab, how many deaths in Canada from nuclear power have we seen or nuclear waste in the last 50 years?
Yeah, I don't have the specific fact, Ms. Gladue, but my understanding is the number has been incredibly low. Any deaths related to nuclear has come from construction, but not from the operations of nuclear. In fact, nuclear has probably one of the best records for energy generation compared to any of the comparables. And just to your point about the environmental assessment and the impact assessment, I think it's BC Bill C-69 you're referring to. The requirement requires an impact assessment for anything over 300 megawatts. But the truth is, there's also the allowance for the environment minister to call upon impact assessment for any project. So it's not like anything is hiding under the bill. The bill does allow for the right projects to have the right reviews when necessary.
Absolutely. And we have heard that SMRs are being subject to environmental review, as they should. And so I just wanted to get that on the record. Now, how many medical impacts do we see in Canada from nuclear power or nuclear waste? My impression is that really we've not had any incidents related to that. As you've said, it's all about construction incidents and like.
Correct. And maybe if I can just add to the medical side of the other part that might not be promoted as much is the benefits to the medical industry. For example, the sterilization of medical equipment, the cancer treatments that medical isotopes such as cobalt-60 and lutetium provide. So there's additional benefits to nuclear just beyond power production, which many are not really aware of.
And would you agree, Mr. Saab, that really Canada cannot support its energy needs as they're increasing over time as our economy grows and more businesses are put in place without nuclear power?
That's absolutely correct. I believe science has told us, and also it's been repeated by the former Minister of Natural Resources Canada, that there is no credible path to reaching net zero by 2050 without nuclear. The energy Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, finish.
The density of energy available to uranium is incredibly high, and we need to continue on the generation of nuclear for us to get to a path that Ontario has successfully done in the past several years.
We've heard some testimony that says there are barriers facing people that are trying to get SMR technology commercialized and sold in the world. What do you think those barriers are?
Well, I'll speak for myself. Really, there haven't been significant barriers at this point. It's the other panel was mentioning. It's an opportunity for us to listen, to learn, to understand what the requirements will be and what the expectations will be of end users. And that's really the exercise we're going through. From a technology perspective, we have an incredibly high confidence. Westinghouse has been a pioneer of commercial nuclear for I think Shippingport was the first commercial power plant in 1957. So we have an excellent track record. So we don't have to concern about technically. What we need to do is educate. We need to listen. We need to understand. And then we need to work with our peers. We need to work with industry, also the regulator, to ensure that we follow a very credible and very mature path to ensure that we are doing things right the very first time.
We have heard some concerns that in terms of trained workers for this industry, that Canada is facing a shortage and we need to take action in order to address that. Would you agree?
I think trained employees are required in pretty much every industry. I think as technology improves, we're going to see a demand requirement. I've had the luxury of the last 4 years in leading Westinghouse Electric Canada. I was that single employee 4 years ago, and we've been able to scale to 250 employees. And like I said before, we want to scale beyond that. And part of that is engaging with communities, with universities, understanding that we need to promote, we need to educate, we also need to sponsor. To ensure that we have the workforce, not only for today, but also for tomorrow. And it's something we're proud to be doing because it stimulates the economy. It also generates additional workers for more than just nuclear, for Canada to increase the GDP requirements across the country.
And we appreciate your work. What else can the federal government do to make sure that we grow and make successful our nuclear industry?
To be quite honest, I'd love for us to just continue to review facts. We've been put through a very stringent due diligence for what was part of the Net Zero Accelerator program, and that is incredibly positive. What needs to be, we need to have those challenges put in front of us so we can work together to inform, educate, and also where there are challenges we can't get overcome, work with the government to understand what funding, what sponsorship, and what needs to happen for Westinghouse and for the industry to be successful in Canada.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I think that's about the end of my time. I saw the card go. Thanks so much, Chair.
Thank you so much, Ms. Gladue. Appreciate your comments as always. As I said to this committee, we have a very interested committee. We will now go to Ms. Bradford for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you to our witnesses for being here this evening. So I'm going to direct my questions, I believe, largely to Mr. Saab. Previously, in a previous life, I did an interview with the president of Westinghouse Canada when it was located in Hamilton, big power generation plant there. So I'm very interested. Can you tell me where your 250 employees are located now?
Yeah, absolutely. So spread across southwestern Ontario, we have a manufacturing plant in Peterborough. We have an engineering office in Burlington. We have 2 smaller engineering offices in Stratford, Ontario, and London, Ontario. We also have a satellite office in Port Elgin. And beyond that, we're also trying to grow the rest of Canada. We do have an employee in Vancouver, BC, and several employees in Ottawa, and we have 1 individual in New Brunswick.
Okay, great. So scaling up the ability to produce or the government's use of SMRs, while important, it doesn't really fall within the scope of this committee. So what I'm going to be focusing on is the research your company is doing either independently or with post-secondary institutions, and you already have alluded to some of that.
Yep.
What are the areas of research most necessary for the progression of SMR technology?
Really what we're looking at right now in Canada is application development. What we are developing is a nuclear battery, essentially. We've been able to license the technology from Los Alamos Laboratories, and our action has been to scale that technology to allow it to be of commercial use. And what we would like to do with the technology is really provide clean, safe nuclear energy, about 5 megawatts, which would last about 8 years at 100%, and also provide high temperature heat where required. So what we're really looking at is not internally on the device itself, because we have the engineers, we have the technical capability, we have the licenses to understand that technology. Where we want to work with universities and communities, how we can use this technology to really empower, enable I used some examples before in terms of communities that we've talked to in remote communities, looking for clean drinking water or being able to have reliable heat or be able to turn electricity on. What we are trying to do with the universities is to really look at those applications. And just so I'm more specific, what Westinghouse has been doing has been sponsoring OTU, for example, with scholarships for women in STEM. We've been working with McMaster to understand what we can be doing together to look at technologies. And we're also working with the Saskatchewan Research Council to see what applications Westinghouse can do in Western Canada. So we're not just focused in Ontario.
Okay, so you are working with McMaster University and then out in Saskatchewan, but are those the two primary post-secondary institutions you're working with currently?
And we have the sponsorship with Ontario Tech University for the Women in STEM program.
Okay, great.
Where we mentor and we also sponsor students in the program.
Is that located in Durham or?
Yep, that's right.
Okay,
in Whitby, yeah.
Whitby, right. Okay, that's great. Can you elaborate a little bit more? I know that there is a great shortage of medical isotopes. It was critical a year or so ago, I think because Chalk River was down for a bit. What is your role in that? And can you elaborate a bit on where you're at and how you can contribute?
Sure. My role is secondary for now in supporting Bruce Power and OPG. Bruce Power and OPG provide cobalt-60 to Nordion, who is the global leader of cobalt-60. In fact, I think Nordion supports 80% of the global needs for cobalt-60. And about 2/3 of that comes from CANDU plants. So pretty much every medical device that's been sterilized is thankful because of cobalt-60 and what Bruce Power and OPG are doing for the program there.
Okay, so what kinds of research is your company engaging in besides R&D that focuses on improving SMR marketability? Because there have been some witnesses that have indicated that there's no market for these. And so can you tell us what your focus is in that area?
I mean, we are looking at what the market needs are and what we're hearing and what we're seeing, and we're also using third parties, so it's not just ourselves telling ourselves that there's a market there. Is that there is a need for industry to find ways to reduce their dependence on fossil fuel. As we know, if we're going to meet the Canadian 2050 net zero requirements, they're going to have to scale off fossil fuels. So we're seeing heavy industry look for replacements for example, backup diesel generators. We're also seeing that communities, customers, industry that are on edge of grid applications where they aren't heavily serviced by T&D transmission and distribution lines also require some high source of reliable power. And we're also looking at how the Evinci microreactor can be used for research. Coming back to your isotope question, there might be an opportunity for us to develop our microreactor to also look at being able to do other isotopes beyond just cobalt-60.
Well, that's interesting. Okay, well, thank you. Turning now to Dr. Edwards, many people do feel that there is a role for nuclear power in helping to address our carbon emissions targets. I know you have an awful lot of concerns, as many people do, about, the issue of the nuclear waste. So I don't have much time here, but are you aware of any promising research that addresses the issue of nuclear waste? I know it's been a concern and focus of yours. Dr. Edwards?
You're on mute.
I'm sorry.
Very good.
No, really, the technology for dealing with nuclear waste has not even been implemented in terms of high-level waste. And also, as of now, Canada does not even have a policy for dealing with post-fission intermediate-level waste. So we're really still at the dawn of the age of nuclear waste, and we don't know.
Dr. Edwards, I'm sorry to interrupt. Perhaps one of our colleagues will follow up. Thank you very much, Ms. Bradford, for your questions. And with that, we go to Monsieur Blanchet-Shankar.
Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to welcome the witnesses here with us this evening. Mr. Edwards, my questions are for you. Could you continue to tell us about the management of radioactive waste, the costs in particular? And my other question is also related to the waste management. And there was a unanimous recommendation of the Seaborne Commission after an environmental evaluation process of 10 years and also the creation of waste management and how it should be independent from the industry and those that promote it, like Natural Resources Canada.
Yes, this is a real problem. We consider that the unanimous recommendation of the Seaborne Panel way back in 1998 was that there should be a fully independent nuclear waste agency with a board of directors that represents various stakeholders. Instead, what we have is a radioactive waste management organization which represents the waste producers. And so there is a kind of a conflict of interest there, which could become very serious when things start going wrong. In Germany, for example, they had an underground waste repository, which for 10 years, the people in charge did not reveal that it was leaking into the groundwater and into surface waters. Now they're spending over $5 billion in Canadian equivalent to take that waste out of that underground repository. It'll take 30 years, it costs a lot of money, and it's quite dangerous. So we need to have people who are independent of the industry and who do not see the necessity to cover up problems because it's bad PR for the industry.
Merci, Dr. Edwards.
Thank you, Dr. Edwards. Could you tell us more about the cost associated with managing nuclear waste? I have a few examples that I had noted. We're looking at $100 billion Canadian. For example, regarding the negligence in Chalk River and Port Hope. From your perspective?
$1 billion is more than I have heard. I've heard that it's about a $16 billion federal legacy of radioactive waste disposal. The difficulty is that we don't know how to eliminate or neutralize these wastes. So all we can do is stabilize them. The Port Hope waste, for example, consists of about 2 million cubic meters of radioactive waste materials. And after 8 years of trying to find a home for these wastes all over Ontario, they came up empty-handed. This was called the Siting Task Force of the federal government. And so now they have, as a kind of a booby prize, they have 2 large mounds right near Port Hope, which are going to hold about 1 million cubic meters each. They're now using that temporary facility at Port Hope, which was never the goal in the first place. They're now using that model at Chalk River to have a giant mound of post-fission radioactive waste right beside the Ottawa River, about 1 kilometer away, and that has half-lives in it. They have half of the radioactive materials in that mound have half-lives of over 100,000 years.
Merci, Dr. Edwards.
Thank you, Dr. Edwards. And yes, $16 billion, that's Chalk River. Yes, I was referring to Starkfield in England and in what we see in Mount Washington as well. That's where the $100 billion was cited for the management of nuclear waste. Mr. Edwards, I'd like to hear what you have to say also regarding what you have to say about the nuclear agency that should not be under NRC.
Yes, well, when we come to the Nuclear Waste Management Organization, this organization will be spending about an anticipated $26 billion to dispose of Canada's high-level radioactive waste, which is from the commercial nuclear power plants. However, if they, for example, were to choose a site and emplace the waste as they did in Germany, and then discover that that site was unsuitable, they're faced with a tremendous dilemma, because if they have to take the waste out again and start all over again, obviously the costs mount very greatly. And that's what's happened in other countries. As you say, Hanford, Washington, for example, and in Sellafield, North England, the costs of cleanup there have amounted to the equivalent of about $100 billion of money just to deal with the cleanup of those wastes. And remember, cleanup doesn't mean we're eliminating them, but simply that we're storing them in a better condition. So this is a problem that is going to plague our grandchildren's grandchildren, whether we like it or not. It's not something that we can actually snap our fingers and get rid of it. Now, when you reprocess the waste to recover plutonium, many studies have shown that, in fact, you generate even more complicated waste, and you do not reduce the volume of the repository, nor do you reduce the overall volume of the actual waste, because you add to the volume of waste by contaminated equipment, et cetera, et cetera. So Reprocessing is certainly not a solution to the waste problem, although the industry portrays it as such. One of the things I'm concerned about is that the industry is really looking for government funding in order to help their industry survive and also to help Canadians. But I think this committee should recommend research that is specifically aimed at protecting the health and safety of Canadians from the byproducts of this industry.
C'est bien, Madame la Présidente.
That's right. That's all right. I think we just had a few seconds left. Thank you very much, Mr. Blanchet-Chonka.
Okay, we will now go to Mr. Cannings for 6 minutes.
I'm sorry, I missed the presentation, so I'm hoping that Ms. Zarillo is still there and can take the questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cannings. Ms. Cirillo is indeed here. Thank you, Ms. Cirillo.
Thank you very much. So I will carry on with just a question to Mr. Edwards, and then I would have a question for Mr. Saab as well. But to Mr. Edwards, I just wanted to ask again on the proliferation concerns. So we heard some testimony today about what's kind of being maybe marketed as a nuclear battery. And I just wanted to get some thoughts or your thoughts on what, if a layperson could realistically handle nuclear batteries, if we called it that.
Generally speaking, these kind of devices can be handled by a layperson over the short term. It's really a question of what happens afterwards. The Cobalt-60 was mentioned earlier, that we in Canada and the OPG and Bruce Power send Cobalt-60 sources all over the world. 80% of the market is from Canada. What they don't mention, however, is that all of that Cobalt-60 comes back to us as radioactive waste. And in fact, the largest component that's going into the radioactive waste mound at Chalk River, 99% of it is Cobalt-60. So that's the problem with these radioactive materials. Radioactivity cannot be shut off. That's why nuclear reactors melt down even after they're shut off, because the radioactivity generates so much heat that it will actually melt the core of the reactor. And so it's these long-term legacy wastes that are left behind that constitute an enormous burden on future generations.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. And Mr. Saab, I want to kind of carry on that vein of speaking. And, you know, we talk about abandoned oil wells right now in the prairies. You know, this idea that private corporations took all of the profits and kind of left the taxpayer and the environment with the cleanup, I guess I would say. And even in municipalities, we know that municipalities are left with empty pipelines and as new pipelines get built. So I just wanted to know your thought about, you know, what kind of protections are up front for cleanup on the back end. And I guess that relates to the idea of these nuclear batteries. And so my second question is about the lifespan of those nuclear batteries and what the disposal plan might be.
No, thank you for the question. Great question. Maybe I can answer a couple different ways. So first, when we look at the eVinci microreactor technology, just for context, and I did provide some information, and I'll follow up with the committee to ensure that they had their questions answered about the technology itself. It is a 5 megawatt nuclear reactor, about the size of one sea container for the reactor itself, and then there's a 1 sea container for the I&C equipment and 1 sea container for the power conversion unit. The flexibility and luxury we have about the sea container is that it is mobile, so we can take it to site and leave it at site and power site for 8 years with 100% non-emitting energy, whether it's electricity or for heat. At the end of the 8 years, should they not require another one, the whole unit as is can be taken back, leaving no legacy waste or legacy damage. The eVinci microreactor does not use external water, and the only output there would be heat. To answer your question on the proliferation, I think there was a question in there too, just about the fuel itself. The luxury that we have with the eVinci microreactor is it uses trisol fuel, which are tiny pellets encapsulated by a protection barrier. So that first makes it nearly impossible to do anything damaging with. But the luxury of a microreactor is the amount of fuel and uranium required is incredibly small. So in terms of if there were to be any bad actors trying to do something with microreactors or our nuclear battery, they would require thousands of these microreactor C containers to be able to put together. So it would be physically and technically impossible to do so.
And thank you, Mr. Saab. And just thinking of, the future of it. So, we know a lot of e-waste goes overseas or gets shipped away from Canada and then ends up in as pollution. So I guess I just wanted to understand if there is any protections, if those conversations are already happening on a global scale around what SMR waste might look like to the globe going forward.
Yeah, not at a global scale. I'm sure it's happening at the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, but every country is looking at that mandate to ensure that they do handle the fuel correctly. And Nuclear Waste Management Organization Canada, along with the CNSC, our regulator, would have plans in place to ensure that the stringent requirements of the CANDU plants in Canada are followed by any of the SMR providers having to deploy their units in Canada itself. Same with the NRC, the Research Council, or sorry, the National Regulatory Council in the U.S. as well would do the same thing for the U.S. colleagues.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cirillo. We colleagues are now going to go to our 5-minute rounds. And this time we begin with Mr. Soroka.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to all the witnesses for coming this evening. I'll start with Mr. Saab. Did I hear you correctly? Earlier you had said that there's really no challenges or policies or issues with building nuclear, such as SMRs in Canada. Would this also include Bill C-69?
Yeah, I was referring to the technology itself. Thank you for the question. In terms of legislative requirements, there's, I wouldn't say there are challenges, but there are processes that we need to follow. So as a nuclear reactor, as we work provider, we would work with utilities, end users, customers to follow the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission environmental assessment requirements. And should we be looking at a microreactor under 200 megawatts, although C-69 may not be mandated for us, there might be a possibility that impact assessment would be required. Now, the impact assessment does add burden. It does add cost. It also would slow down for anything less than the 2 or 3, I think it's 300 megawatts actually, allowances that are required. So there is a potential for us to take a technical process and make it a little longer and more expensive, and ultimately, which is the sad part, is to delay some of the solution that could be provided to these remote communities and these industrial users of technology.
Would you find that the policies that are in place are making it any safer, or is this just to give public feel that it's safer?
That's a good question. I guess the truthful answer is with more rigor would probably come more questions and more time to ensure diligence is made. Now, ultimately, if it's going to answer questions that have not been answered by an environmental assessment or any of the internal work done by a reactor developer such as Westinghouse or an end user, or even under the requirements of the licensing process under the CNSC, I would not anticipate any questions or challenges be posed that were not identified through those current steps. So no, I don't think that the benefit, at least for Bill C-69, would be truly there for the public.
Okay. Another question then, the committee has talked about with remote communities not to have an SMR there, just continue on with the current diesel or whatever other system they have to generate electricity. But in these remote communities, having an SMR, would that not give them more opportunities to either create a new business or to increase the area and the size of people coming in? So it sort of gives them a growth factor. Is this an opportunity?
You are absolutely correct. I mean, it's not just about the power and electricity provided. It really is about the economic development that clean, safe, reliable electricity, heat can provide for these areas. So we are having those conversations, and that has been what's being told to us that they do require electricity because it is a GDP provider, because it allows them to do more than what they currently can do. So to answer your question, it's an absolute yes. This nuclear, an SMR, our Vinci microreactor would be a true enabler for remote communities needing clean drinking water, needing clean electricity, and really to improve their quality of life and allow them to do more.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Dr. Edwards, we've heard from witnesses that have stated that there is critical issue with public confidence in small nuclear energy. Do you find this to be critical in the implementation of SMRs in our community, and how vital is it public engagement and communication when attempting to establish an SMR?
Well, I think you've certainly touched on something very important. What we've heard from the industry is that they have visions of how these SMRs could be used if somebody wants them. The difficulty is that they don't have customers clamoring down the door, actually signing on the dotted line saying, as soon as these are ready, we'll buy them. They're not like electric cars, which are selling like hotcakes. Nuclear reactors are not selling like hotcakes. In the past, when they've tried to even give these things away, here in Quebec, they tried to give away a small reactor to the University of Sherbrooke, and they couldn't succeed even there. So it's a moot question whether people are going to want these things, and also whether the problems associated with it are as simple as rejected. With regard to environmental assessments, the only reason one small modular reactor is undergoing environmental assessment today is because it's under the old law. No new SMRs would be subject to an environmental assessment under the existing statute if it's under 200 megawatts. Thank you.
Mr. Soroka, and again, I just want to acknowledge all our witnesses and how much we appreciate your being here. We will now go to Mr. Collins for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for their attendance this evening. I'll start with Mr. Saab. Mr. Saab, some critics have argued that the technology won't be ready until at least 2030, or if at all, and have characterized SMRs as an expensive science experiment. And they've suggested at the same time that we should be obviously looking at wind, solar, and other options. And we've heard that tonight from some of the other witnesses that while you've been present. What's your response to that?
Thank you for the question. I can answer in two parts. So first, with respect to the technology readiness level, like I mentioned before, the luxury we have had is because we are taking an existing technology and scaling it up. We have a very high comfort that the technology will be ready well before 2030. The truth is we already have the electrical demonstration unit up and running where we take electricity to create electricity, and that is really proving out the heat pipe design and the scalability of what we've licensed from the Los Alamos lab, and that has been completed successfully. The next step would be a nuclear demonstration unit, which we have planned to have completed by 2026. So that is well within the 4 years. In terms of when it's commercially ready for the market, up to the questions posed before, it really depends on the licensing process. And the other question that I believe Dr. Edwards had mentioned to the customer requirements as well. We do have customers who do want the unit now, and we're hoping that the licensing process would be much shorter, and they would have access to the unit itself today. And in terms of the partnership with the renewables, I'm a huge supporter of renewables, both wind and solar. But we've heard countless times before, and today it's not, and right now it's not sunny in Toronto, that there are times when the sun's not shining and the wind's not blowing. Technology like the Vinci microreactor, we can envision it being coupled with wind and solar to allow safe backup whenever we don't have that power coming from the renewables itself. So it might actually exploit and support renewables to grow even further than today because they don't have the safe backup required, and sometimes require, I think, diesel backups to provide power when it's the wind's not blowing.
Oh, thanks for those answers. I was very intrigued with Dr. Edwards and his comments as it relates to the marketability of SMRs. And we've had a number of witnesses in front of us that have talked about the investments that have been made by the private sector in terms of getting us to a point in time where the technology is proven and that they're ready to be sold to customers. And so can you respond to how much money the private sector has invested into the technology? And I would maybe just deal with that from a domestic perspective here in Canada. And then, what does the customer base look like? Who will be purchasing these SMRs, and what kind of what kind of dollars and investments are at play as it relates to the marketability and we've heard about the economic uplift once they're in communities and the jobs that will be created. But I'm interested in terms of the sales themselves. I just find it hard to believe that the private sector would invest so much into the technology only to find out there's no ROI at the end of the day. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. We believe there is an ROI. Otherwise, we wouldn't be investing our own funds into technology. Maybe I can speak to what's been public information, and then I can be a little more specific about Westinghouse because I don't want to talk for the industry when I don't have the details. But through the Strategic Innovation Fund, through Innovation, Scientific, Economic Development Ministry, they have funded 3 different reactor technologies, terrestrial, Moltex, and Westinghouse Electric Canada for a Vinci reactor. On our Vinci reactor, for example, Mr. Collins, we've been given $27 million, not given, it's a contribution agreement, which we pay back for the record. So we have a contribution agreement for $27 million to accelerate the spend within Canada, which 90% of that spend will be in Canada by Canadians to accelerate that technology. On top of that, we are going to put another $40 million just for the program tied to what we're doing under the Strategic Innovation Fund. That does not include all the work that Westinghouse does to mature the technology with our folks and our people in Canada and around the world. And that investment I talked about, the 27 plus the 40, is a small fraction of what's required to move it forward. Having said that, we are a private entity and we do have an ROI expectation. And in consultation with customers, there is a requirement. So, as opposed to me and us saying that there is no customers required, let the customers talk to us and let them say, well, we are hearing from those who want to talk to us, who are proactively coming to Westinghouse looking for this technology now that they know about it. They are looking for these mobile, these transportable, these efficient 5 megawatt batteries to complement, to replace the diesel backup generators. Remote communities have stood up to
Mr.
say why.
Saab.
Oh.
I'm sorry. It's the worst part of this.
It's okay. I can provide more information, Mr. Collins. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we've got 3 minutes left, so to be fair and keep us on time for the next panel, Monsieur Blanchet-Jean-Cap for 1.5 minutes, and Mr. Mr. Rillo for 1.5 minutes. Thank you.
I just want to make sure I understood correctly. 2.5 minutes for me?
Keep us on time at 1.5 minutes, so we start the next panel because we have a hard stop.
Okay. C'est pas dans les règlements qu'on a.
That's not on the rules we adopted at the beginning, however, Madam Chair.
1.5 minutes, please.
Madam Chair, I would support giving, extending if we could, stealing time from the next panel, perhaps, just to maintain peace in the House.
Is that what you would like?
Yes, please.
Okay, that means you may lose it on the next panel. The reason we were late, lost time here is because people were talking.
J'entends pas, Madame la Présidente, elle pas traduit.
I'm not hearing what's happening. There's no interpretation.
Jean-Cap?
Oui.
Okay.
Yes, could you please repeat? There was no interpretation at the time.
Okay, so if we take it from this panel, we're going to lose it on the next panel. If everybody's agreed to that, okay, there seems to be agreement. Monsieur Blanchet-Jean-Cap, 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'll continue with Dr. Edwards. Could you tell us again and more about waste management? Are there other things that we need to know about that?
Well, one of the greatest difficulties is how to prevent chemical reactions from occurring along the intermediate level waste. In Carlsbad, New Mexico, there was a drum that exploded and turned into a flamethrower, and radioactive dust went 750 meters up the shaft and contaminated 22 workers. This is because of chemical reactions. So chemical reactions can occur, which then spread the radioactive waste. This is a big problem over the long term.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I think you told us earlier about the issue of environmental studies. Currently, SMR, so all of these projects are not getting these environmental assessments. Could you tell us more about this lack of assessment and this lack of action regarding these studies for SMRs?
Yes, I think what we're seeing here is that the industry is coming to the government asking for accommodation to speed up the process so that they can get on with their private money-making job and also do, as they say, something about climate change. The problem is that they can't do anything about climate change for the next decade. And so they want the money now and they want to speed it up. And one of the ways of doing that is cutting out environmental assessment because democracy is too expensive. It slows you down too much. So let's not be democratic and let's just move ahead and put the technology in place. This has never been the case in Canada before. Always nuclear projects were subject to federal environmental assessment.
Merci, Dr. Edwards.
Thank you, Dr. Edwards. And I'd like to hear from Ms. Gigantes. I think you were quite clear at the beginning. You said that nuclear energy is not the answer for the energy transition and for the zero waste or net zero efforts. Could you tell us more?
Ms. Gigantes, you're on mute. Ms. Gigantes, you're on mute. And a short answer, please.
There. I will be short. Currently, we know how to use renewables in ways across this country with backup from hydropower on a Canada-wide basis. And we can do that when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. The schemes that have been developed both here and abroad to allow us to do that, and Canada is actually perfectly situated and granted the resources to do it with hydro as the backup.
Thank you, Ms. Gigantes, and thank you, Monsieur Blanchet-Chancas. We will now go to Ms. Cirillo for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you so much. And I do have a question for Ms. Gigantes, and then I am going to move to Mr. Edwards to talk a little bit about the question I asked Mr. Saab earlier about planning for waste. Ms. Gigantes, you mentioned around energy efficiency efforts and actually changing human behavior. And I know this is something, too, that my colleague, Mr. Canning, talks about. Can you expand a little bit on how we are going to move human behavior if we just pivot to a new energy source?
Well, I'm suggesting that what we do to replace the kinds of carbon-producing energy we have is to use renewables. But the cheapest source of new energy is when we cut back our use. For example, in the house I'm living in, we installed a geothermal unit in 2019, and it had, 2009, and it paid for itself within 10 years. And now the cost of electricity in this house, it's run on an electric current, that geothermal unit, it's amazing. It's quite amazing. I thoroughly recommend it to everyone. Good investment.
Thank you very much. And I think we heard some pushes for heat pumps, too, in this testimony. Mr. Edwards, I just wanted to ask you, so I had mentioned about how abandoned oil wells and even for natural gas, abandoned pipelines. And I'm just wondering if you're aware of any conversations that are happening in governments and industry around having to make accommodation now for what will be waste later.
Well, that's certainly important because right now in Port Hope, Ontario, we have the largest municipal environmental cleanup in Canadian history, over $1 billion, $1.2 billion, simply to retrieve huge amounts of radioactive waste that were dumped in the harbor. Hundreds of homes were built using this material, roadways, dumped in ravines and so on. And just simply retrieving that waste and demolishing the buildings that were contaminated is a very expensive project. These monies should be put aside very early. And with the SMRs, it's a real problem as to who is really going to be responsible. Almost all of the promotional literature says nothing about who is responsible for the waste.
Thank you, Dr. Edwards. To all our witnesses this evening, we really thank you for being part of this study. We thank you for your time, your commitment, your expertise. With that, our committee will suspend briefly before we go on to a third panel. Thank you again. Suspended. I'm going to pull you back. You work so hard. 2 hours is tough. We're going into a third hour. We'd like to welcome our witnesses, to all of you. We thank you for joining us tonight. As an individual and in person, we have Dr. Jeremy Rayner, a professor. From the Canadian Nuclear Workers Council, we have Robert Walker, the National Director, and from the Sylvia Federic Canadian Centre for Nuclear Innovation, we have Dr. John Root, the Executive Director. We welcome all of you. Each organization will have 5 minutes. At the 4.5-minute mark, I will hold a yellow card. It allows you to have 30 seconds to finish up. So with that, we're going to start, and we go to Professor Rayner. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here this evening. My name is Jeremy Rayner. I'm a political scientist by training. I'm a professor at the Johnson Shayama Graduate School of Public Policy at the University of Saskatchewan. My research on the public policy implications of SMRs has been supported over the years by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada and by the Sylvia Fedora Canadian Centre for Nuclear Innovation. As an aside, I would say that I was distressed to hear the suggestion earlier this evening that all funding for research on SMRs be routed through NSERC. There are very many important questions, perhaps the most important questions about SMRs are actually questions that fall within the purview of the social sciences and the humanities in terms of their success or failure. I've been fortunate to be on sabbatical leave this year, and I spent some of that time at the Dalton Nuclear Institute at the University of Manchester in the United Kingdom, researching SMR developments in the UK and Europe. I have submitted some written evidence in the form of a peer-reviewed publication for the committee. I'd like to start by saying that in the UK and Europe, anecdotally, Canada is regarded as a world leader in SMR policy and governance. We're admired for the extent of collaboration between the provinces and the federal government, for bipartisan support for SMRs that provides confidence for investors, the relatively transparent processes for choosing SMR designs, and the clear responsibilities and timelines set out in the SMR roadmap, the action plan, and this year's strategic plan. The challenge is to maintain our position as leaders and translate that leadership into the development of a technology that actually contributes to meeting our clean energy goals. So my question has always been, what should be the approach of policy and governance that would build on this successful start? There are currently two issues that SMR advocates are trying to put on the federal policy agenda, and you've heard both of them this evening and at prior meetings of your committee, subsidies and regulation. And you're unsurprised, I'm sure, to learn that advocates think SMRs should attract more of the former and less of the latter. On subsidies, there's a general principle of policy design that it's better to provide support for solutions to a problem rather than to specific technologies or industries. And to some extent, of course, Canada has followed that path through the various clean energy funding initiatives. And I draw your attention to the European Union's recent decision to include nuclear energy under some circumstances as a sustainable investment for funding purposes, and I'd urge that this approach be continued. Regulation raises the critical issue of public confidence in small nuclear. If SMRs are really to be a transformational technology rather than just a useful addition to our power generation options, and that's a good enough target to start with, then they must be built closer to where people live and work than traditionally large reactors have been. This will only happen if we can raise public confidence in nuclear safety to new levels, and the reputation of the CNSC for evidence-based regulation needs to be protected, and efforts to rush the licensing of new designs, I think, regarded with extreme caution. There's also an issue that advocates are studiously avoiding, or at best responding, I think, with platitudes, and that is public engagement. Engagement is going to test federal-provincial collaboration and require some innovative thinking in science communication and knowledge translation. There is a strong temptation to place the responsibility for engagement on proponents, usually in this case a utility, and that's how the engagement requirements of project-based environmental assessment works. As in other cases involving infrastructure and natural resources, placing the responsibility for engagement on the proponent may seem logical, but it raises a well-known problem that will likely be experienced very strongly in the case of SMRs, and which you've seen already this evening. Members of the public will want to raise broad questions of public policy and regulation around nuclear issues which are beyond the scope of a project-based assessment and outside the competence of a proponent to address. For example, general questions about uranium mining or the disposal of nuclear fuel. Simply telling them that they can't raise such questions at an assessment is not going to help the deployment of SMRs, and I think we need to find some way of including those broader questions into public engagement processes in Canada. In addition, it can be confidently asserted that there is no future for SMRs in Canada beyond a handful of first-of-a-kind demonstration projects taking place on sites already licensed for nuclear facilities without prior, informed and meaningful consent of Indigenous peoples. Quite apart from new sites that need to be proposed on treaty land or land over which unextinguished rights are asserted, SMRs may involve the transportation of modules, some of which may be already fueled, and the disposal of waste that will not be concentrated.
Professor Rayner,
Thank
I
you.
am so sorry to do this. You have a committed committee, and I'm sure they will want to follow up with questions. Please excuse my having to interrupt. We're now going to go to Mr. Walker from the Canadian Nuclear Workers Council, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening. I'm Bob Walker, National Director of the Canadian Nuclear Workers Council. It's encouraging to see the Science and Research Committee's interest in small modular reactors and the benefits nuclear offers for both the environment and our economy. I'll briefly talk about our council, our perspective on Canada's nuclear industry, and SMRs. Our council was formed in 1993 as an association of unions representing workers across Canada's nuclear industry. This ranges right from uranium mining in Saskatchewan through electricity generation to nuclear waste management. The council serves as our collective voice. We hold an annual conference in various nuclear host communities and regularly engage with labor, industry, and the regulator, and more information can be found on our website. We have a very mature, made-in-Canada nuclear industry that was built on the pioneering work started by AECL more than 7 decades ago. The CANDU reactor has been deployed in Ontario, New Brunswick, and Quebec, as well as exported to a number of other countries. CANDU reactors are a proven, reliable technology that currently supply about 60% of Ontario's and 30% of New Brunswick's electricity. That electricity is generated without carbon emissions or air pollution. The refurbishment programs for Canada's reactors will keep them generating that clean electricity for decades to come. This has been said before, but it's important enough to be repeated. Nuclear energy enabled Ontario's transition off coal by providing both clean energy and quality employment. The industry includes a number of great corporations, and they support employment for thousands of Canadians across many communities. These are skilled jobs with good pay and great working conditions. I believe I can speak with some authority when I say our nuclear facilities are amongst the safest workplaces anywhere. We need more quality jobs like these. Canada's nuclear industry is a mature industry that continues to evolve and demonstrate innovation in many areas, such as radioactive waste management, advances in nuclear medicine, including the production of medical isotopes, and exploring new opportunities to support a clean energy future, including SMRs. We believe the importance of our current CANDU reactors cannot be understated, and we need to plan for the construction of new conventional scale reactors. But some markets and some applications cannot support the large reactors, and SMRs offer a great opportunity. SMRs have shone a light on nuclear energy's ability to combat climate change, and Canada has demonstrated great leadership in advancing that through the SMR roadmap, SMR action plan, and the great cooperation we've seen between provinces and utilities to explore opportunities for SMR deployment and development. Many jurisdictions around the world are now watching the progress in Canada with great interest. Today, we're seeing real action and real opportunity with the OPG's plans to build an SMR at their Darlington site and possibly follow up with 3 more. Saskatchewan Power is expected to build their own SMR after OPG's is proven successful. BWXT in Cambridge is hoping to manufacture components for that BWR X300 for both domestic use and for export, and including Poland. NB Power is working with Moltex and ARC to develop advanced SMR technologies. Global First Power is progressing their proposed micro modular reactor at CNL's Chalk River site. And Westinghouse, as you heard, is working with the Saskatchewan Research Council and Bruce Power to progress their eVinci microreactor. SMRs can help the world meet their clean energy needs, and Canada has a great opportunity as an early leader. In closing, the nuclear industry is very important for Canada. It's been generating reliable, affordable, emission-free electricity for decades. It produces isotopes used for our quality healthcare, and it supports many high-quality local jobs. These are great jobs. SMRs have received a lot of attention in global discussions about climate change as a source of emission-free energy. Canada has an opportunity to continue this leadership. Canada's nuclear industry was created with support from the Government of Canada, but that support has not been as consistent and encouraging as we believe is warranted. We would like to see the government act as a champion for our nuclear industry, as an important part of the solution to fight climate change, provide quality employment, and support energy security. Thank you very, very much for investigating this topic, and thank you for allowing me the time to talk.
Thank you for joining us, Mr. Walker. We're really grateful to all of you that you take your time. We're now going to go to Dr. Root. The floor is yours for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I feel honored by the invitation to participate with a panel of witnesses for this important study of small modular reactors. I serve as the Executive Director of the Sylvia Fedoruk Canadian Centre for Nuclear Innovation. We are a not-for-profit corporation with a single institutional member, which is the University of Saskatchewan, but we have a fully independent board of directors. The Fedoruk Centre is funded through an agreement with Innovation Saskatchewan, an agency of the province, plus revenue from third parties for goods and services that we provide. The purpose of the Fedoruk Centre is to help place Saskatchewan among global leaders of nuclear research, development, and training through 4 key activities. For one, we fund research projects led by Saskatchewan scientists in some kind of nuclear topic of their choice. We partner, secondly, with Saskatchewan institutions to help them establish new faculty leaders of nuclear subjects in line with their strategic plans. Thirdly, we operate a nuclear facility, the Saskatchewan Centre for Cyclotron Sciences. This is a resource for innovation in nuclear imaging for health and food security. And fourthly, we establish consultative resources for the public and policymakers. We facilitate partnerships and develop business related to nuclear innovation. Pretty well everything you do that's got something with nuclear, it's our job to try and help Saskatchewan engage with these things. At this time, the province of Saskatchewan is moving forward with Alberta, Ontario, and New Brunswick towards deploying small modular reactors to help achieve Canada's objective of a cleaner energy future and stimulate a wide range of economic activities and social benefits arising from this innovative technology. It seems very likely that Saskatchewan will place our first nuclear power plant onto the electricity grid in the mid-2030s. Then we will proceed in steps to replace the burning of fossil fuels with a new foundation of baseload electricity to which other clean energy technologies can add. It is also reasonable to consider very small nuclear reactors to power resource extraction industries that are located far from the grid and would otherwise need to be burning fossil fuels to have the energy to operate. Deploying a nuclear power technology in Saskatchewan would not only help to move Canada towards reducing the burden of greenhouse gases on our planet, but can also create opportunities for research and innovation in the surrounding fields, the topics connected to the power generation. Examples would be adding value to the uranium that is mined in Saskatchewan. Perhaps we could be enriching the uranium and fabricating enriched fuels. Both of these economic activities are only performed outside Canada at this time. So there's an opportunity to create new value if we put our minds to it. Another possibility is to manufacture nuclear quality components in Saskatchewan. This would enable Saskatchewan companies to contribute to the Canadian supply chain for building SMRs. Or perhaps we could be a part of responsible management of used fuel as a part of protecting the environment. Saskatchewan will need people to serve as operators, technicians, designers, builders, regulators, safety engineers, control system architects, and security experts. That means we will be needing to create many new jobs in Saskatchewan and fill them with people at all levels of educational development. And that means we need to get started right away, establishing a new capacity for leadership in research and education in nuclear topics at Saskatchewan post-secondary institutions. There's only three main ones here: the University of Saskatchewan, the University of Regina, and Saskatchewan Polytechnic. Now is the time to attract new leaders who can create educational programs and establish themselves as trusted knowledge keepers to whom the public can turn for unbiased advice on nuclear topics. Turning to them, we can learn how nuclear energy works, how nuclear safety is maintained, how we can minimize impacts on the land, how we can engage in respectful public conversations.
Dr. Root, I'm
Yep.
sorry to do this.
Okay.
You're very gracious, all of you.
That's okay.
We have, I
Okay.
thank all our witnesses. We're really glad you're here. And now we're going to hear from our members of our committee who are a dedicated group of people. And we're going to start with 6-minute rounds, and we begin with Mr. Tucker.
Yes, thank you to our witnesses. To Mr. Walker, earlier we heard about the need to train more, I believe, pressure welders. Can you give a kind of, do you represent, I'm assuming some of your members would be pressure welders?
Yes, I was listening earlier and I did hear that question. Our membership includes people, unions representing people right from mining in Saskatchewan, fabricating the fuel in Ontario, operating nuclear power plants, construction and building trades council of Ontario. So it's really the whole gambit. And I know that the building trades are very engaged in trying to look forward to how many people are going to be required. So they're looking at nuclear projects and all projects, all major infrastructure projects, trying to get an idea of how many people will be required in the future and making sure that they're working with their employers to recruit those people and train those people. So I do know it's been identified as an issue, especially welders, and I do know there's a lot of work being done in that field.
What do you think your members would say if there's a political party that would say we shouldn't consider nuclear because of the shortness of some of the skilled trades?
I can't imagine anybody saying that. We're always looking for good employment. This is good employment. And all we have to do is forecast those opportunities so that we're training people for them. I would hate to think that anybody would not pursue an opportunity because we don't have enough skilled people. The answer is to get our people skilled.
Would you want your siblings hopefully to work in nuclear, or your offspring or family members?
That's a great question. And my wife's not here, so she can't stop me from answering it. My son works in a nuclear power plant. She didn't want me to say that to people because she doesn't want it to look like I got him a job, but I can honestly say I didn't. He got the job himself. But my son works at Bruce Power, at a nuclear power plant at Bruce Power. My nephew works as an operator at OPG's Darlington plant. So I do have family that works there, and I'm extremely happy for them. I was so happy when they got the job because I know how safe it is. Everyone wants their children to work somewhere safe, and I know that they have a safe job, and it's a good job.
Great. And there's some that would want to transition oil and gas workers to different opportunities. Would the pay be similar or less than oil and gas if you're working in nuclear, or would it be above average or comparable?
I don't have the details, but off the top of my head, I would say they're probably very comparable. Skilled trades whether it's in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, they're paid very comparably. So I think if you're looking at a skilled worker in the oil and gas sector in Alberta or Saskatchewan, they're probably paid very close to a tradesperson working in nuclear in Ontario or in New Brunswick.
Some
and,
believe
as far as sorry.
Nope. Some believe we need a $15 minimum wage in the country, and some would argue that it's already there. Do you have any members that start at minimum wage by chance?
No. We do represent, I mean, this is a huge industry with people of all different types of jobs, and the lowest paid occupations I'm aware of would be the cafeteria workers at the nuclear power plants, and they make more than that.
And you makeup of the workforce, what percent is male versus female? I'm assuming it would be a vast majority males, or is it more of a even mix?
If you had asked me that question when I first started, I would say vast majority were males. That's changing. It's been changing for a long time and continues to change. We're seeing a lot of women in engineering, in STEM occupations. We're seeing a lot of women in like civil type jobs, and we've seen a lot of women in the nuclear operator positions. Where we're really behind is the trades. We're not seeing as many women in the mechanical trades, electrical trades, as we'd like to see. But there's a lot of work going on to try to improve that. I've gone out myself and brought tradespeople with me to go to schools to talk to people about what these jobs really look like. People think these are dirty jobs, and they're not. You wouldn't, if you saw a skilled tradesperson at work, you wouldn't know what they were doing. It's a high-tech job. It's a high-skilled job, a very rewarding job. And when we take young women in the trades out to talk to women in school about their occupation, they get excited about it and they're interested in it. So we need to do more of that.
And quickly, what do you keep track of turnover rates? What's the typical lifespan of an employee at a facility?
I've known a couple of people that moved a long distance to start a job at like Ontario Power Generation, for example. And sometimes at the very beginning of their career, they leave because they want to go home. Other than that, I'm not aware of anybody leaving. These are jobs that people want to hold on to.
And quickly, could I get a written response from Dr. Root about the importance of medical isotope to our medical hospitals across Canada? If you don't mind, I believe I'm out of time right now. And I think that's
Mr.
important.
Tucker, I'm sorry, but thank you for the questions. And now we're going to go to Mr. McKinnon for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to direct my questions to Dr. Rayner. So we've heard a lot of concern from the public, both here and kind of out in the world, about nuclear power. And people's minds typically go to things like 3 Mile Island or Chernobyl or Fukushima. And I mean, I think when we're talking about small nuclear reactors or small modular reactors, and even smaller, such as micro and very small, that we're dealing with quite a dissimilar kind of situation. So I think that I suspect that the risks are rather dissimilar as well. Can you speak to us, if you're able to, about the nature of risks, the nature of the potential for environmental catastrophes, such as with 3 Mile Island or Chernobyl, in relation to small modular reactors and similar smaller units?
Certainly, and I think you're, of course, correct that in terms of the amounts of fissionable materials and the amounts of radioactivity that might be released and so forth as a result of an accident from a small reactor, the advocates of small reactors are quite correct that they are very different from what we would see with a very large reactor. What I think we have to consider with small reactors, as I mentioned in my remarks, is we have, for the reasons that we've talked about already, we tend to build large reactors away from people. We tend to build large reactors if we can't build them a long way away from people with very large exclusion zones to protect people from the consequences of an accident. And if small modular reactors are to fulfill their promise for the various applications that have been proposed for them, they will have to be very close to people. I'd like to ask the members of the committee here to consider a thought experiment. I walked to the meeting this evening through the massive construction that's going everywhere, as you do, I'm sure, every day. And I walked past a shipping container that was humming slightly. I imagine it had some sort of air conditioning in it or something of that kind. And I thought nothing of it. Imagine if that was a small nuclear reactor of the kind we heard described in the last session that would fit in a shipping container, and that it was on an Ottawa street, as some proponents of small nuclear reactors have proposed. And I think proposed in very interesting ways. These are things that SMRs can do for us, the big reactors can't do. There, I think we would have to consider very carefully not just the objective risk of what's in there and what might happen if there was an accident, but the subjective perceptions of people who would be asked to walk backwards and forwards around that every day.
So, as you heard, the Westinghouse person spoke of a microreactor that comprises 3 storage containers. Is that where we're heading, or maybe even smaller with, say, microreactors going down the road so we could use it on ships, trains, and so forth?
Well, again, one of the very interesting things about SMRs, which this committee, I'm sure, has gone into some detail, is the huge range of applications, from pushing the envelope of an SMR over 300 megawatts to put on the grid, putting it on a site that's already licensed for nuclear, and so on, down to those very small, in which, for example, we might deal with some of the very energy-intensive needs of future urban development by having SMRs in that urban development and new SMRs as the development grows. If we're going to power electric cars, if we're going to have connectivity on the scale that advocates are talking about, we need electricity, lots of it. And I think what's really interesting about SMRs is not that they can replace large nuclear or large baseload power capacity, but they can find all sorts of different kinds of applications. But those different applications, I think, ought to cause us to ask hard questions about risk and risk perception.
Excellent. Thank you, Doctor. I know we're going to be short of time tonight, so I'm going to defer the rest of my time back to the committee.
That's very generous of you, Mr. McKinnon. Thank you for that. And we will go to Mr. Blanchet-Shankar.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to welcome the witnesses who are with us for our third committee hour. My first question will be for Dr. Rayner. I saw that you are leading a comparative study on the development and the use of these SMRs in the UK. Could you tell us more, please?
Certainly, and thank you for the question. The UK and much of the rest of Europe is also interested in SMRs, and for the same reason that Canada is interested. They have mature nuclear industries, they have a great deal of expertise, and very little prospect until recently of very large new nuclear builds. So SMRs, I think, were an obvious way of keeping that scientific expertise active and alive and recruiting new people into it. So it fits that innovation agenda and the science establishment agenda. But as people, I think, began to investigate what SMRs could do, people have become, I think, genuinely interested, as I say, in these different applications from power grid level SMRs. So we see, for example, in Finland, interest like there is in Canada for northern and remote applications of very small reactors. We see in France, which began, in fact, to be with being being very opposed to the idea of SMRs and sticking with the large reactors that they currently have. Again, an interest in SMRs because of the different things that they can do. So I think there are many reasons why people in Europe are interested in SMRs.
Merci, Dr. Rayner.
Thank you, Dr. Rayner. If Canada were to continue with the SMRs and their development, what changes would have to be made to the legislative framework surrounding them, particularly regarding the governance of nuclear waste produced by these reactors?
Yes, the nuclear waste question, I think, is a very interesting one because, as we know, until now we have stored nuclear waste on site. And when you have relatively few, relatively large reactors, that is a solution for a long time. The question, I think, then of how we will deal with waste that is dispersed across a wide variety of smaller sites is problematic. I mean, we heard Westinghouse talk about just removing its modules and taking them back, but they still have to dispose of what's in there. And moving that waste to, let's assume in Canada we are successful, as I hope we are, in having a deep geological repository for waste. Moving the waste to there is going to raise some very interesting governance and policy questions. Not least, of course, the Indigenous questions that I mentioned, not least the fact that New Brunswick waste would have to travel across Quebec in order to get to the repository in Ontario.
Merci, Dr. Rayner.
Thank you, Dr. Rayner. Do you believe that Canada is doing enough right now to protect Canadians against the dangers related to nuclear waste, and how do we compare with other similar countries?
I think we have a reasonable record in terms of protection. The Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission has worked on this. It is very true. I think I've myself done some work on the dangers of low levels of radiation, and the policy and regulation around there is quite strong. And remember, of course, radiation is coming not just from nuclear power or the waste from nuclear power. It is experienced every day by technicians who are doing medical treatments, by people working in dentist's office and so forth. And we have, I think, a well-developed regulatory scheme here. What we have to do, I think, is not give way to the suggestion that the need for speed in the deployment of SMRs should allow us to relax or change that regulatory framework. That's in my mind, that's the danger. It's not the danger that what we have is not enough. The danger is that we may be tempted to reduce the protections we currently have.
Merci, Dr. Rayner.
Thank you. I'd like to hear what you have to say about an argument put forward by those who are in favor of SMRs, the economic model. They say that components would be standardized, there would be economies of scale, and so on. Do you have information on how much of this we would need to really get to economies of scale and also have a return on investments? Because there are a lot of other countries, for example, Russia, the US, that will eventually wish to develop this technology as well. I mean, will we be selling it overseas? That would be difficult to be competitive with these larger countries.
That's a very important question, and I'm neither an economist nor do I have access to the information that the companies have about costs. In fact, they don't even have very strong information right now until they build one.
Might I interrupt and make a suggestion? Monsieur Blanchet-Jean-Cas, since that's the end of your time, would you like Professor Rayner to give you a written answer?
Oui, merci beaucoup.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Professor Rayner, thank you to you both. To Mr. Cannings for 6 minutes. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, and thank you to all the witnesses. I'd like to continue with Dr. Rayner, just follow up on his comments on, the need for good public engagement, in particular around the free, prior, and informed consent he mentioned with First Nations. We have a situation, for instance, at Chalk River, where the Kabawek First Nation is, I don't want to speak for them, but they seem clearly very, very concerned about what's going on at Chalk River without their consent. They want a complete new review of how nuclear waste is dealt with in Canada. They have really made that point that, they have not been involved in the past, nor adequately in the present in this. We have the Ontario First Nations chiefs coming out in a very strong statement against the use of, this narrative of using SMRs on remote First Nations communities, as kind of one of the first uses of this technology. So I'm just wondering, and then I was interested to hear your comments about this. We shouldn't rush into this, and I kept thinking of, how a lot of our previous energy policies were rushed and then delayed because of the lack of proper consultation with First Nations in particular. In that rush to get pipelines built, et cetera, we ended up having them delayed because, the courts got involved and it was found that consultation hadn't occurred properly. I'm just wondering if you could follow up on that and as to whether we're kind of rushing into this, not getting off to a good foot forward in the SMR field with regards to First Nations especially.
Thank you. And those are very important questions. But I'd like to distinguish between those kinds of questions with respect to First Nations that arise because of previous developments. There are legacies of poor engagement. Chalk River, I'm afraid, know enough about to say whether that's the case. But we have to remember in the past, of course, and this is the case in northern Saskatchewan, that uranium mining was undertaken very, very quickly as a matter of national security in the 1940s and 1950s, and took a very long time for that legacy to be overcome. But I have to say, Cameco is a world leader in Indigenous engagement and shows that it is in fact possible to remedy the mistakes of the past and to regain trust from Indigenous people. New projects, I think, with SMRs are interesting. Some of the work that we've done that has been funded by the Fedoric Centre has suggested actually some very significant interest from Indigenous people in terms of the energy poverty and energy insecurity that many of those Indigenous nations encounter on a daily basis. But they wish to understand more about the technology first. They wish to know exactly what they're getting themselves into, and they wish to know, as you say, questions like what's going to happen to this material when it's spent, what's going to happen to the installation if it has to be taken away, and so on. So those are questions. People are attempting to answer them, but we shouldn't take our eye off the ball here. And secondly, I do think this is a really important role for the federal government in Canada to try to make sure that those consultations happen and that appropriate consent is asked and given.
Well, thank you. And I'm just wondering, while I've got you, just to maybe comment more generally, how you think Canada has done with public engagement and transparency in the nuclear power sphere, especially with moving forward with waste management, because I hear
Yes, waste management is very interesting in that respect. I mean, we tried once to do this and did it very poorly and had to start all over again. But when we did start all over again, I think actually in Canada, especially compared with other countries with which I'm familiar, we've done a very reasonable job. And I think you have to understand that the opponents of nuclear power, whatever else they may think, they regard holding up disposal of nuclear waste is a really important way of putting a damper on the development of the industry. And they will continue to make those sorts of claims, even if they're not in fact justified.
Okay, thank you. How much time do I have?
I'm afraid, Mr. Cannings, that's it. Yes, it was right on time. Thank you, Mr. Cannings. Thank you to all our witnesses. And now we're going to go to our 5-minute round, and we go to Mr. Soroka.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to the witnesses, thank you for coming this evening. I'll start with Dr. Walker. It was stated in April of 2022 newsletter of the Canadian Nuclear Workers' Council that the exclusion of nuclear power in the Government of Canada's recent Green Bond framework was extremely disappointing. Can you please expand on the faults found in this framework?
Yep, thank you for the question. I wrote that myself, so I can speak to it. I was most disappointed just because of the way it was portrayed. Like, I've worked in the nuclear industry my entire life. My father worked in nuclear, and as I said earlier, my son works in nuclear. And to take our jobs in nuclear and compare them to gambling and tobacco and the typical syntaxes, just the way it was done was very upsetting. I know that the future of the industry will be better if it's easier to access financing. And this will put a damper on that. But the big thing for me was just the way it was done.
Also, Dr. Walker, it was outlined in the Canadian Nuclear Workers' Council that a multinational research effort is underway to recycle nuclear fuel in CANDU's nuclear technology. Can you please update us on some of the most promising updates in this process?
Thanks for the question. I really don't feel qualified to answer that question. I need to say one thing. I'm not a doctor. My background, actually, I'm a nuclear operator. So I don't feel qualified doing that. I know there's a lot of work going on. We've heard some discussions already from companies like Moltex on what they're doing. And I've talked to companies like Terrestrial. There's a lot of work going on about recycling used fuel, recycling used CANDU fuel, but I don't know any more than what we've already heard here about where that's headed. Sorry.
That's okay. I'll go Dr. Rainier. Please, you're in the room here. So you've also stated that a critical issue of public confidence in small nuclear reactors. Do you know of some of the regulations this government has in place to address this concern, and how do you think we can propose to improve public confidence in SMRs?
Well, the first piece that we have in place is an arm's length regulator, and I think that's very important, and we should not do anything to jeopardize the independence of that arm's length regulator. The regulator, the CNSC, has been involved since 2014 with the International Atomic Energy Agency's SMR working group, working through issues around regulation. My concern with CNSC is they quite rightly don't see it as their role to take part in that process of engagement on behalf of a design or a use or whatever it may be. So we have to ask, where is the engagement going to come from that will at least hear, if not address, the concerns the public may have. And here I think it's unfortunate that the battle over the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act and its subsequent amendments has raged in the way that it has, because it has tended to take a very narrow definition of evidence that is to be taken into account in an assessment, and it would help if we had some other kind of forum. If we don't want to reopen that question, it would help if we had some other kind of forum that could discuss that kind of question. It was something that we discovered in Saskatchewan when we tried to do this with the Uranium Development Committee. Again, this need that people have for information that they can trust and someone who will answer their questions.
Yeah, I think that's very important, to make sure the information you have is you can trust. Also, you've talked about Indigenous engagement, making sure it's very early in the process and how essential it is. What recommendations do you have to advance SMR development in Canada while considering the interests of Indigenous and the other vulnerable, marginalized communities in Canada?
Mr. Soroka, since the time's up, would you like to ask Professor Rayner for a written answer?
If he could please provide a written answer to that.
Thank you so much, Mr. Soroka. And now we will go to Mr. Collins.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And I have the same question of for both Dr. Rayner and for Dr. Root, if I could. And it's around the whole issue of public engagement that has been talked about already. And as a longtime municipal councillor, I spent I had many meetings related to energy from waste. And when the proponent came to town, there was a crowd that attended the meeting, like almost a pitchfork and torches crowd that would come out with a high level of skepticism as it relates to the technology that was being proposed and the impacts that it would have on the community when operational. And so I listened with interest, Dr. Rayner, to your comments around public confidence. And I just wonder what your suggestion is or your recommendations are related to the federal government's role related to education as well as public engagement. And so you touched on that extensively on the Indigenous side of things. But your comment that if transformational, these SMRs need to be built closer to where people live and work. I picture it in my riding. A prior witness referenced that it's ideal for the steel community, and I'm from Hamilton, and so I thought, geez, if someone came to town and proposed this in my riding, I could guess what the reaction would be from neighborhoods around the steel company, who are already put up with environmental nuisances and worse. So can I get your comment on that in terms of what role do we play in terms of taking that obligation away from the company and the proponent who's profit driven, and there's that level of skepticism that comes from the community. And so how do we take some of that how is some of that onus put on us to assist in that process? If these benefits are what people are advertising, we want to see them for various reasons. But when they make their way to communities across Canada, I fear there'll be great public pushback. And so, sorry for that long question, but I would ask for both you and Dr. Root to assist with that.
Yeah, if I could quickly then give two answers to that. The first is, I don't think you can get away from having some kind of broad, open engagement, whatever it may be. I started out as a young researcher in forest policy at the time of clear-cutting controversies. As you can probably tell, that was a very long time ago. And now, at that time they used to call those public meetings the last of the blood sports. And we have to get away from that. So I think that it should be possible, for example, to engage academic researchers, engage universities, engage others who have professional experience in public engagement to do more detailed, more small group, more. We've worked with the Fedoric Center developing citizen jury processes for testing out ideas about different kinds of energy, and they've been, I think, very successful. So they're time-consuming, they're expensive, but I think we have to think outside the box about how we'll do that kind of engagement.
Dr. Rib? You're muted, sir.
The Fedoric Center has been supporting research on how to do this, how to engage public in a respectful conversation. And that's a couple of ways to try and do this. First of all, we are trying to make sure we have lots of people in Saskatchewan doing nuclear things. And it could be nuclear medicine, materials research, energy, policy, just so that we have intelligent people who think about nuclear things. They're proud of what they've done. They tell their story, and it familiarizes the community or gives opportunities for the community to be familiarized with nuclear as just an adjective, not as an emotional touch point. We've also run, as Jeremy was saying, events that are available to the public to participate in the form of like a talk show. We bring some experts to the front. They don't actually do a lot of talking, but they have a conversation with the audience. It just flows along with the questions in a certain subject. So it could be radiation in the environment on one, or another one might be what do we do about nuclear waste or something like that. And that becomes kind of a human conversation, a respectful conversation. And we haven't seen too much of the pitchforks and torches in that kind of venue. We have had opportunities also to be in the media. When the SMR announcements come out, people want to know what they are. And some examples are talk shows where you have different
Dr. Root,
points of view.
I apologize for interrupting. And thank you for your if you, perhaps Mr. Collins might like a written answer.
All right.
Please.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Thank you. And in the interest of fairness, first of all, to all the people who support this committee and to all our members and to all the witnesses who've been so gracious, I'm going to give Monsieur Blanchette-Joncat and Mr. Cannings each a question, and then we will finish for the night. Monsieur Blanchette-Joncat.
Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'll be asking my question to Dr. Rayner. I know you have expertise in nuclear policies. I'd like to hear what you have to say about the unanimous recommendation of the Seaborne Commission, which is to have an agency, a nuclear waste management agency that is separate from the industry and those promoting the industry.
Yes, that's a difficult question. I mean, the argument against it is that why should public funds be put to help out the industry? Why doesn't the industry step up and do this? And that's what they're doing. The disadvantage, of course, is that they are not perceived as fair and impartial. So we have got some way with the current arrangement. I would certainly not be opposed to revisiting those recommendations and constituting a waste management organization in a different way.
Thank you, Professor Rayner, and thank you, Monsieur Blanchette-Joncat. The last question to the evening will go to Mr. Cannings.
Well, thank you, and I'd like to direct this at Bob Walker. And hi, Bob. It's good to see you again. I just quickly, questions about training. A lot of the remote communities I've talked to about SMRs, they want to have the jobs associated with their energy projects around their communities. So what sort of training will operators need to operate SMRs? Is this something that people in remote communities can be trained quickly to do? And how many jobs will be there at an SMR after construction?
For the jobs numbers, I wouldn't have a number. Depends on which technology we're talking about. I've heard numbers range for the grid scale SMRs from like the 100, 150 range. And construction jobs, as you said, would be a lot more than that. When it comes to training, I started my career in Uranium City, Saskatchewan, and El Dorado Nuclear shut the mine down. I had to be retrained. So I went to community college in La Ronge, Saskatchewan, where I was trained to work at the new uranium mine at Key Lake. So that retraining can happen locally. It happened decades ago with me, and it can happen again. For a nuclear operator, it's going to depend again on the technology. The training program for our large reactors is fairly long, but they would take people theoretically from high school, but usually they take people from college program, sometimes university program, and a couple years training.
Thank you, Mr. Walker.
Thank you.
I want to, and thank you, Mr. Cannings. I want to say thank you to all our witnesses. It's late at night. You've been so gracious with your time, and we thank you for sharing with us. I want to thank the excellent members of this committee, and I want to thank everyone who works so hard to support this committee. We're done. Adjourned.